Elise's hand froze as the stranger looked at her sketch and pulled out his phone. "This is why I'm here," he whispered, showing her a photo of her daughter's portrait, the masterpiece she thought had burned in the fire that took everything else. Their eyes met, and for the first time in years, Elise felt the impossible weight of destiny. What miracle brought this man carrying her lost treasure into her life? If this story moved you, like and subscribe to our channel, and share your own stories of lost treasures found again. The park around them seemed to fall silent. The rustling leaves, children's laughter, and distant traffic all faded away. There was only this man, this stranger with kind eyes, holding the impossible on his screen, her most precious creation. The painting she had poured her soul into, the last image of Emma she had created before the fire claimed it all. How the word escaped her lips as a prayer, a plea, a question she never thought she'd have reason to ask. What miracle had brought this man carrying her lost treasure into her life? 3 years earlier, Elise had set up her easel in the sunroom of her Victorian home. Light poured through the windows, illuminating her canvas as she mixed the perfect shade of amber for Emma's eyes. Her daughter had refused to sit still for formal portraits, so Elise worked from photographs and memory, capturing the 16 spirit rather than just her likeness. "Mom, you're making me look too serious," Emma had complained when she'd seen the early sketches. "I'm painting what I see," Elise had replied, dabbing her brush into a rich sienna. "When you think no one's watching, it had taken 4 months to complete. For months of layering oils, of stepping back to study each brushstroke, of capturing the quiet determination in Emma's gaze. The finished piece was unlike anything Elise had ever created. More than a portrait, it was a window into her daughter's soul. "It's beautiful," Emma had whispered when Elise finally showed her the completed work. "It's like you can see inside me." They'd hugged then, a rare moment of perfect understanding between mother and teenager. 2 weeks later, Emma was gone. A rainy night, a slick road, a driver who looked at his phone for just a second too long. The painting became everything after that. Elise would sit before it for hours, finding comfort in those amber eyes that still seemed alive with light. Her marriage, already strained by years of quiet disappointment, couldn't withstand the weight of their shared grief. Richard moved out 6 months after the funeral, leaving Elise alone in the house that felt too large, too empty, too haunted by laughter that would never return. The fire happened on the anniversary of Emma's death. Elise had lit candles, fallen asleep with a glass of wine. She never knew if it was a candle or faulty wiring that sparked the blaze. She woke to smoke and heat, barely escaping with her life and nothing else. The firefighters had held her back as she screamed about the painting. "It's just a thing," one of them had said, not unkindly. "You can't replace a life." But they didn't understand. It wasn't just a thing. It was Emma, the last piece of her that existed in the world. Insurance covered the house. Elise moved into a small apartment and tried to paint again. Her fingers wouldn't cooperate. Each canvas remained blank or was destroyed in fits of frustration. Her gallery dropped her after a year of missed deadlines. Art critics who had once praised her work now wrote about her as a has-been, a talent extinguished by tragedy. Eventually, she stopped trying to create anything significant. Simple sketches in the park became her therapy. Strangers, birds in flight. Nothing that mattered. Nothing that would hurt to lose. Until today, when her pencil had captured something in this man's face that compelled her to truly see. Again, something about his eyes reminded her of Emma, not the color, but the depth, the hint of gentle wisdom behind momentary sadness. And now he stood before her, holding the impossible on his phone screen. Her painting, Emma's portrait, the masterpiece she had mourned as deeply as she mourned her daughter. Elise reached out a trembling hand toward the phone, afraid it might disappear if she touched it. "Where?" she managed to ask. "How did you find it?" The mantle with salt and pepper hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and sorrow knelt beside her bench. "That's a long story," he said softly, "but the short version is that the painting found me, and then it led me to you." Elise clutched her sketchbook to her chest, suddenly aware of how exposed she felt. This stranger knew more about her loss than people she'd known for years. He had seen Emma's face, had looked into those amber eyes that Elise had created with such care. "The original," she whispered. "You have a photo, but the actual painting, it survived," he said simply. "It's safe, and if you're willing, I'd like to take you to see it." A cool breeze rustled through the park, sending fallen leaves dancing around their feet. Elise looked at her simple sketch of this man's face, then back at the photo on his phone. two images connected by an impossible thread. "Who are you?" she asked. "My name is Michael," he said, offering his hand, "and I've been looking for you for a very long time." They moved to a quiet cafe across from the park. Elise wrapped her hands around a mug of tea she hadn't tasted, studying Michael over its rim. He was probably in his early 50s, with the kind of face that wore its years with dignity. His clothes were simple but well-made dark jeans, a navy sweater over a button-down shirt. Nothing about him suggested deception, yet Elise had learned that tragedy makes you cautious. "I found your painting 6 months ago," Michael began, his voice low and measured. "There's a small gallery in Oak Ridge about 2 hours north of here. It specializes in recovered art pieces that have survived fires, floods, wars." "The Lazarus Gallery," Elise murmured. She'd heard of it, a passion project of an eccentric collector who believed art had souls that could be saved. Michael nodded. "You know it, by reputation." "I never visited. I go there sometimes when I need to think. There's something about artwork that's survived destruction. It carries a different energy." He smiled slightly. "That probably sounds pretentious." "No," Elise said. "I understand. Your painting was in a back room, not part of the main exhibition. I was wandering, and there it was, this portrait that seemed to look right through me." Michael's eyes grew distant with the memory. "I've never experienced anything like it. The girl in the painting, she had this gaze that seemed to recognize something in me that I didn't know was visible." Elise swallowed hard. People had always commented on that quality in her work, the ability to capture something beneath the surface. With Emma's portrait, she'd poured everything into revealing the person her daughter was becoming, not just the child she had known. The gallery owner, Marcus, saw me standing there. I must have been in front of it for 20 minutes. He told me it had come to him through a firefighter who'd rescued it from a house blaze. The artist was presumed to have perished. "They thought I died," Elise whispered. Michael shook his head. "The records were confused. The firefighter who saved it was injured shortly after and never filed a complete report. By the time the painting reached Marcus, all he knew was that it had survived when much else was lost. And my signature, my name was on it. Just Elise in the corner. No last name." Marcus had tried to research, but without more to go on. Michael hesitated. "The painting wasn't for sale. Marcus keeps a special collection, pieces waiting to find their way home." Elise set down her mug, her hands suddenly unsteady. "But how did you find me? How did you know I would be at that park today?" "I didn't," Michael admitted. "I've been searching for months. The style of your painting matched some work I found in gallery archives, online exhibitions from before the fire. I tracked down your old gallery, but they'd lost touch with you. Your former address led nowhere. Then last week, I saw a small notice for a community art therapy session in the park. The instructor was listed as Elise, former portrait artist. It seemed worth investigating." "I've only been teaching those sessions for 2 weeks," Elise said. "You found me through a community bulletin board." Michael smiled. "Sometimes the universe aligns in strange ways. I've visited that park every day this week, hoping to find you. Today wasn't even the scheduled class time. It was canceled because of the weather forecast," Elise said softly. "I just came to sketch because the rain held off." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of coincidence or something more settling between them. "Why?" Elise finally asked. "Why go to such lengths for a painting that isn't yours? For an artist you didn't know?" Michael looked down at his hands, strong and slightly weathered. When he raised his eyes again, Elise saw something vulnerable there. "Because when I stood in front of that painting, it was the first time in 2 years that I felt anything at all." His voice grew quieter. "My wife Sarah died 3 years ago. Cancer, quick and brutal. After that, I just existed. Nothing touched me. Nothing mattered." He took a deep breath. "Until I saw those eyes looking back at me from your canvas. There was something there, wisdom, a depth of feeling that woke something up inside me." Elise felt a chill run through her. 3 years, the same time she'd lost Emma. "I needed to find the person who could create something that powerful," Michael continued. "At first, I thought it was just appreciation for the art itself. But the more I searched, the more I felt connected to the story behind it. The painting survived against impossible odds. That had to mean something." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone again, offering it to Elise. "Here, look closer." Elise took the phone, her artist's eyes immediately assessing details she'd missed in the shock of their first encounter. The painting was intact, but there was a slight darkening along one edged smoke damage that had been carefully treated. The frame was different, not the simple black one she'd chosen, but in ornate gold that somehow suited the portrait better. "It's really her," Elise whispered. "It's really my Emma." "Emma," Michael repeated gently. "Now I know her name." Elise looked up at this stranger, who had carried her daughter's image across time and circumstance to find her. "When can I see it, the actual painting?" "Whenever you're ready," Michael said. "Today, if you want. My car is nearby." Elise hesitated, years of protective caution warring with desperate longing. "I don't know you." "No," Michael agreed. "But I think, in some strange way, we know each other through that painting." He pulled out a business card and placed it on the table. "Michael Tanner, former architect, current art restoration consultant. You can look me up, call the gallery too, verify my story. Meet me another day in a public place." Elise picked up the card, running her thumb over the embossed letters. "The painting has waited 3 years," she said finally. "I suppose it can wait another day." Michael nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course." As they parted outside the cafe, Elise turned back. "Thank you," she said, "for not giving up the search." "Some things are worth finding," Michael replied simply. "Some connections are meant to be restored." Elise watched him walk away, the business card clutched in her hand like a talisman, a key to a door she had believed forever closed. Elise barely slept that night. She sat at her small kitchen table, laptop open, searching for information about Michael Tanner. His website was professional but minimal photos of restored artwork, brief testimonials from galleries and private collectors, contact information. A LinkedIn profile confirmed his previous career as an architect with a prestigious firm in the city. Nothing raised red flags, but nothing fully explained his determination to find her either. She searched for the Lazarus Gallery next, reading about its founder, Marcus Chen, a former insurance adjuster who had become obsessed with saving artwork from disaster sites. The gallery's mission statement spoke of preserving the soul of creation against the forces of destruction. There was a phone number. Elise glanced at the clock, nearly midnight. Too late to call. Morning came with gray skies and a fine mist that beaded on her kitchen window. Elise made coffee and tried to quiet the hope that had kept her awake. The painting might not be what she remembered. It might be damaged beyond recognition. It might not be hers at all, just something similar that had triggered this man's imagination. Her phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. "No pressure. Just letting you know, I'm available whenever you decide." Michael. Elise set the phone down without responding. She needed to verify his story first. At 9 a.m., she called the Lazarus Gallery. "Yes. Michael Tanner is a regular visitor, an occasional consultant." The receptionist confirmed after Elise explained the situation. "And yes, we do have a portrait matching that description. Mr. Chen has been holding it in our restoration room." "Can I speak with Mr. Chen?" "He's traveling this week, but he left notes about the painting. He said if the artist was ever located, we were to release it immediately." Relief washed through Elise, followed quickly by suspicion. It seemed too easy, too convenient. After years of loss, could recovery really be this simple? She finally texted Michael, "I'd like to see the painting, but I'll meet you at the gallery. I'll drive myself." His response came quickly. "Of course, 2 p.m. work for you. It's about 2 hours north." Elise agreed and spent the next hours in restless preparation. She changed clothes 3 times, unsure how to dress for a reunion with her most personal work. Finally, she settled on a simple black turtleneck and jeans, her painting clothes, the uniform of her former life. The drive north gave her too much time to think. What would she feel, seeing Emma's portrait after all this time? Would it be healing, or would it tear open wounds that had never properly closed? And what about Michael, this stranger who had inserted himself into her grief with such quiet determination? Could she trust his motives? By the time she pulled into the gallery's small parking lot, her hands were trembling on the steering wheel. The Lazarus Gallery was housed in a converted Victorian mansion, its elaborate architecture at odds with the modern sculpture garden that surrounded it. Michael's car was already there, a sensible dark blue sedan. He was waiting outside, hands in the pockets of a charcoal overcoat. When he saw her, he straightened but didn't approach, letting her set the pace of their encounter. "You came," he said simply, when she reached him. "I had to know if it was real." Elise replied. Michael nodded. "I understand. I called ahead. They've prepared a private viewing room. Inside, the gallery was hushed and dimly lit, walls painted deep burgundy to showcase the artwork. A young woman greeted them at the reception desk. Mr. Tanner, Ms. Reynolds. Mr. Chen left specific instructions. Please follow me. Elise shot Michael a questioning glance. How did they know my last name? I didn't give it to them, he said, looking equally surprised. The receptionist led them up a curved staircase to a small room at the back of the second floor. Take as much time as you need, she said, closing the door behind them. The room contained only a single easel draped with a velvet cloth. No painting was visible yet. Elise stood frozen by the door. Now that the moment had arrived, she wasn't sure she could face it. Would you like me to leave? Michael asked quietly. She shook her head. No, you found it. You should be here. The truth was, she didn't want to be alone with whatever was under that cloth, whether it was Emma's portrait or a crushing disappointment. Whenever you're ready, Michael said, standing a respectful distance away. Elise took a deep breath and approached the easel. Her hand hovered over the velvet for a long moment before she grasped the edge and slowly pulled it away. The cloth slipped to the floor, forgotten, as Elise gasped. There, in perfect preservation, save for the slight smoke damage along one edge, was Emma looking out from the canvas with those wise amber eyes, that hint of a smile that suggested she knew something the viewer didn't. The brushwork was unmistakably Elise's, every carefully considered stroke exactly as she remembered creating it. It's real, she whispered, her voice breaking. It's really her. Behind her, Michael remained silent, witnessing her reunion without intruding on its intimacy. Elise reached out a trembling hand, stopping just short of touching the canvas. I never thought I'd see it again. Her fingers traced the air above Emma's cheek. I never thought I'd see her again. The tears came then, silent and overwhelming. Years of contained grief finding release in this moment of impossible recovery. She didn't realize. Michael had moved until he gently pressed a handkerchief into her hand. The simple gesture of kindness broke through the last of her reserve. Thank you, she managed through tears. Thank you for finding her. Time seemed suspended in that small viewing room. Elise lost track of how long she stood before the painting, absorbing every detail she had committed to memory and canvas years ago. The exact shade of amber in Emma's eyes, the slight asymmetry of her smile, the way her hair fell across her forehead, always rebelling against any attempt to tame it. She was beautiful, Michael said softly from where he stood by the window. Yes, Elise agreed, inside and out. She finally turned away from the portrait to look at him. I don't understand how this is possible. The firefighters said nothing survived. Ms. Reynolds, a new voice, joined their conversation. As the door opened, a middle-aged Asian man with round glasses and a meticulous gray beard entered. I'm Marcus Chen. I apologize for the confusion. I was supposed to be traveling, but my plans changed. Mr. Chen, Michael stepped forward to shake his hand. I thought you were in Chicago this week. The exhibition opening was postponed. Chen's attention was already shifting to Elise. Ms. Reynolds, it's an honor to meet you. Your work has been a treasured mystery in our collection. How did you know my name? Elise asked. Michael said he only knew me as Elise. Chen smiled. The painting told me. At her confused expression, he continued, please, sit. This story deserves to be properly told. They settled into chairs that an assistant quickly brought in. Chen remained standing, his energy too vibrant to be contained. When artwork comes to us from disaster sites, we perform extensive restoration and authentication processes, he explained. Part of that involves examining the canvas with specialized equipment, infrared, X-ray, various light spectrums, looking for underpaintings. Elise nodded. Many artists reuse canvases, painting over earlier works. Precisely. In your case, we found something else. Chen pulled out a tablet and tapped the screen. When we examined the back of the canvas, we found this. He turned the tablet to show them an enhanced image of what appeared to be handwriting on the back of the canvas. To Emma, on your 16th birthday. May you always see yourself as clearly as I see you. With endless love, Mom. Elise Reynolds. Chen read aloud. It was written in pencil, very faint, nearly obliterated by smoke damage. It took our best technicians to recover it. Elise's hand flew to her mouth. I'd forgotten, she whispered. I wrote that just before I gave it to her. Once we had your full name, we tried to locate you, Chen continued. but records showed your address had been destroyed in a fire, and gallery contacts said you had disappeared from the art world. We placed the painting in our special collection, hoping someday we might find you, and then I found the painting instead," Michael added, "and became somewhat obsessed with finding its creator." Chen smiled at him. "Mr. Tanner has been one of our most dedicated patrons since he discovered your work. His persistence is remarkable." "But how did the painting survive at all?" Elise asked, the central mystery still unsolved. Chen glanced at Michael, something unspoken passing between them. "That's where the story becomes more personal. The firefighter who rescued it." A knock at the door interrupted him. The receptionist poked her head in. "Mr. Chen, the conservation team needs you urgently. There's a situation with the Morizo watercolor." Chen sighed. "Duty calls. Please, continue enjoying the reunion with your work, Ms. Reynolds. We can discuss its future when you're ready." He turned to leave, then paused. "The painting has been waiting for you. Art has patience that we humans often lack." After he departed, silence settled again. Elise returned to studying the portrait, noting the careful restoration work around the smoke-damaged edge. "They did an excellent job preserving it," she said finally. "Better than I could have hoped." Michael nodded. "Marcus is something of a miracle worker when it comes to restoration. It's why I brought your painting to him specifically." Elise turned sharply. "You brought it? I thought the firefighter did." A shadow crossed Michael's face. "That's part of the story Chen was about to tell." He hesitated. "My wife Saratha, one I mentioned yesterday, she was a firefighter." The connection clicked into place in Elise's mind. "She was there, at my house." "Yes." Michael's voice grew quieter. "She was part of the first response team, according to her captain. She went back in after they'd cleared the house because she thought she heard someone calling. What she found instead was the painting." Elise sank back into her chair, the weight of coincidence becoming too heavy to bear standing. "She saved Emma's portrait, at great cost," Michael said. "The ceiling collapsed while she was carrying it out. She suffered severe smoke inhalation and burns. She never fully recovered, and the complications eventually led to—" He stopped, unable to complete the sentence. "To her death," Elise finished gently. Michael nodded, grief etching new lines around his eyes. "I didn't know about the painting until 2 years after she passed. I was finally going through her personal effects in storage, and I found her last notebook. She'd written about a portrait she'd saved from a fire. A girl with amber eyes who reminded her of someone. She'd arranged for it to be taken to the Lazarus Gallery while she was in the hospital. And when you saw it by chance, it wasn't by chance." Michael interrupted softly. "Nothing about this has been by chance. I went looking for it after reading her notes. I needed to see what she had considered worth saving." Elise looked back at the portrait of her daughter, seeing it suddenly through new eyes, not just as her creation, her memory, but as a link in a chain of events that had connected her to this man through fire and loss. "Your wife died saving my daughter's memory," she said, the words heavy with a debt that could never be repaid. "And your daughter's portrait helped save me," Michael replied. "When I was drowning in grief, those eyes gave me something to hold on to, a purpose, a mystery to solve." Outside the window, rain began to fall, gentle at first, then steady and cleansing. Elise watched the droplets trace paths down the glass, each following its own inevitable journey to the same destination. "What happens now?" she asked, finally, giving voice to the question that hung between them. "Now," Michael said, "the painting goes home with its creator, where it belongs. I can't afford what this must be worth now, the restoration work alone." Michael shook his head. "It's not for sale. It never was. Marcus has been holding it in trust, waiting for you to claim it." Elise looked at him with disbelief. "Just like that, after everything, just like that," he confirmed. "Some things defy the normal rules of ownership and value. This is one of them." They left the gallery with the painting carefully wrapped and secured in Elise's car. Marcus Chen had insisted on providing a climate-controlled transport case, refusing any payment. "Consider it our honor to have been its temporary guardians," he'd said, pressing his business card into her hand. "And please, when you're ready to create again, remember that there's always a place for your work here." Elise had nodded, unable to find words adequate to the moment. The sudden weight of possession, of having Emma's portrait back in her care, left her feeling both exhilarated and terrified. "Would you like to get some coffee before the drive back?" Michael asked as they stood in the parking lot. There's a decent place just down the street. Elise hesitated, glancing at her car where the painting waited. I should probably get it home, get it settled. Of course, Michael said, understanding in his voice. It's been an overwhelming day. But maybe ... Elise surprised herself with the words that followed. Maybe you could follow me back, help me find the right place for it. You've lived with it in a way, through your search. It seems right that you should see it properly hung. Michael's face brightened. I'd be honored. They drove separately back to the city, Elise hyper-aware of her precious cargo. Every bump in the road made her wince, imagining damage to the canvas. Every red light was an opportunity to glance back at the case secured in her back seat. It felt surreal. This painting that had existed only in her memory for years was now physically present again, bringing with it all the emotions she'd tried to contain. At her apartment, Michael helped her carry the case up 3 flights of stairs. Her living space was small but filled with light, a converted factory loft with high ceilings and windows that spanned the eastern wall. It's perfect for a studio, Michael observed, noting the easel in the corner and the organized chaos of art supplies. I haven't used it much as one, Elise admitted, clearing space on her dining table for the transport case. Not for anything serious, anyway. Together, they carefully unwrapped the painting. In the natural light of her apartment, Emma's portrait took on new life, the colors more vibrant, the presence more immediate. Where should it go? Michael asked, looking around the open space. Elise had already decided. There, she said, pointing to the wall opposite her bed. Where I'll see it first thing every morning and last thing at night. They found a hammer and nails, measured carefully, and hung the portrait. Stepping back, they both fell silent, taking in the way the painting transformed the space, filling it with Emma's presence. It's home, Elise said softly. Yes, Michael agreed. It belongs here. She made them tea, and they sat at her small kitchen island, the painting visible from where they perched on stools. There's still so much I don't understand, Elise said, cupping her mug between her palms. Why was your wife drawn to this particular painting? There must have been other things in the house. Michael considered the question. Sarah had an instinct for what was irreplaceable. In her work, she saw people lose everything daily. She developed a sense for what would matter most after the smoke cleared. But to risk her life, that was who she was, Michael said simply, always putting others first, even strangers. He took a sip of tea. In her journal, she wrote that when she saw the portrait, she felt like the girl was calling to her. That sounds fanciful, I know. No, Elise interrupted. Emma would have done the same thing. Run into a burning building to save someone, or something that mattered to someone else. She was fearless that way. They would have liked each other, Michael said with a small smile. Yes, I think they would have. Elise traced the rim of her mug. There's something else I don't understand. The fire inspector said nothing survived, that the interior was completely gutted. How did the painting make it out virtually intact? Michael set down his tea. I've been wondering that myself. Did you keep it somewhere specific? It was hanging in Emma's room after she died. I couldn't bear to have it in the main living space where everyone would comment on it, ask about it. Elise's brow furrowed in concentration. Her room was at the back of the house, 2nd floor. Do you still have the fire report? Elise nodded. Somewhere in storage. I kept all the official documents for insurance purposes. It might help explain how the painting survived when everything else was lost, Michael suggested. Fires have patterns, paths they follow. Why does it matter? Elise asked. It survived. Isn't that enough of a miracle? Michael's expression grew thoughtful. In my experience, understanding the journey helps with accepting the outcome, both the losses and the recoveries. Elise recognized the wisdom in his words. For 3 years, she had avoided examining the details of that night too closely, focusing only on what was lost. I'll look for the report tomorrow, she promised. There's a storage unit across town with boxes I haven't opened since I moved here. Michael nodded. I could help, if you want. Sometimes it's easier not to face certain memories alone. The offer hung between them, simple, practical, yet profound in its understanding of what such a task would require emotionally. I'd appreciate that, Elise said finally. It's time I stopped running from the details. As afternoon faded toward evening, they ordered takeout and continued talking, their conversation shifting from the painting's journey to their own paths through grief. Michael spoke of his architectural career that had faltered after Sarah's death. his gradual move into art consultation and restoration work that felt meaningful in its preservation of beauty. Elise shared how her creativity had frozen after Emma's death and the fire. How the simple act of sketching strangers in the park had become her way of staying connected to her artistic self without risking the pain of creating something she might lose again. That's why you were drawing me, Michael realized. Just a random stranger in the park. Not so random, it seems, Elise replied. Not anymore. When Michael finally prepared to leave, they both glanced at Emma's portrait, now settled in its place, as if it had always been there. Thank you, Elise said at the door. Not just for finding the painting, but for being part of the story, Michael suggested when she trailed off. Yes, she said, relieved that he understood, for being part of the story. As his footsteps receded down the hallway, Elise stood alone in her apartment, facing Emma's amber eyes. For the first time in years, the gaze looking back at her didn't bring only pain. There was something else there now, a sense of continuity, of threads, thought severed being carefully, improbably rewoven. The storage unit was smaller than Michael had imagined, a 5x10 space stacked with labeled boxes and a few pieces of furniture draped in sheets. Elise stood at the entrance, keys clutched in her hand, her posture suggesting she might still change her mind. We don't have to do this today, Michael said gently. No, it's time. She stepped inside, flipping the switch for the single overhead bulb. The insurance and fire department documents should be in one of these. She gestured to a stack of boxes labeled papers in bold black marker. They worked methodically, Elise opening boxes while Michael sorted through folders, the space filled with dust motes dancing in the beam of light, stirred by their movements and the shifting of long undisturbed papers. Here, Michael said, after 20 minutes of searching. He held up a thick manila envelope with fire report and insurance written across the front. Do you want to look now, or bring it back to your place? Elise glanced around the cramped unit. Let's take it back. I can't breathe in here. There was a heaviness to her words that suggested she meant more than just the dusty air. As they were preparing to leave, Michael's elbow knocked against a portfolio case, leaning in the corner. It slid to the floor, its clasp opening to spill several large sketches across the concrete. I'm sorry, he said, kneeling to gather them. It's okay. Elise knelt beside him, then froze as she saw what the portfolio contained. They were preliminary sketches for Emma's portrait studies of her eyes, her hands, the tilt of her head. Elise's artistic process laid bare in swift, confident strokes of charcoal and pencil. I forgot these were here, she whispered, lifting a particularly detailed study of Emma's profile. I did dozens of sketches before I started the painting. Michael watched as she carefully traced the lines with her fingertip, her touch reverent. They're beautiful, he said, so full of life. She never sat still long enough, Elise said, a smile touching her lips at the memory. I had to capture her in pieces, her hands while she was reading, her face while she was watching a movie. She held up a sketch of laughing eyes. This one I drew when she was on the phone with her best friend. She never even noticed me watching her. They gathered the sketches and added the portfolio to the items they would take back. The fire reports seemed less urgent now, overshadowed by this unexpected treasure trove of memories. Back at Elise's apartment, they spread the sketches across her dining table. Seeing them alongside the finished portrait created a narrative of creation, the journey from observation to completion. You really saw her, Michael said, studying the progression. Not just her appearance, but her essence. That's what portraiture should be, Elise replied. Not just capturing a likeness, but revealing something true about the subject. It picked up a sketch of Emma's hands holding a book. She loved to read fantasy novels, mostly stories about other worlds where ordinary people discovered they had extraordinary gifts. Michael smiled. Sarah was the same way, always had a paperback stuffed in her work bag. Her colleagues teased her about it, this tough firefighter reading young adult fantasy between calls. What was she like? Elise asked softly. Beyond what you've already told me. Michael leaned back in his chair, his eyes growing distant with memory. Determined, compassionate, to a fault. Stubborn when she believed she was right, which was most of the time. His smile was both sad and fond. She collected stray animals. We had 3 cats and a 3-legged dog when she died. She sang in the shower terribly off-key. She couldn't cook anything more complicated than scrambled eggs without setting off the smoke detector. She sounds wonderful, Elise said. She was. Michael's gaze shifted to Emma's portrait. What about Emma? What would surprise me about her? Elise's expression softened. She wrote poetry but never showed anyone except me. She volunteered at an animal shelter on weekends. She wanted to be a veterinarian. She laughed suddenly. She was a terrible driver, failed her test twice before passing. I was terrified every time she took the car. The irony of that last detail hung heavy in the air between them. A bad driver who died at the hands of another bad driver. It wasn't her fault, Elise said quietly, answering the unspoken thought. The accident. The other driver was texting, crossed the center line. Michael nodded, understanding all too well the random cruelty of fate. It's never fair, the way we lose them. They fell silent, the sketches between them a bridge across their parallel experiences of grief. Eventually, Elise stood and went to her easel in the corner. It had been covered with a cloth, unused for months. She pulled the covering away and adjusted the height, then selected a fresh sheet of paper and clipped it in place. "May I?" she asked, glancing at Michael. He looked puzzled. "May you what?" "Draw you properly this time, not just a quick sketch in the park." Michael seemed taken aback. "Me? Why?" Elise picked up a piece of charcoal, testing its weight in her hand. "Because you're part of this story now. Because your face was the first thing I've wanted to truly capture in years." She hesitated. "Because I think it might help me find my way back." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "To art, to feeling like I have something worth creating again." Michael nodded slowly. "What do you need me to do?" "Just sit. Be comfortable. Talk to me about Sarah, about your work, about anything." Elise positioned herself at the easel. "Just be present." As the afternoon light shifted across the apartment, Elise's hand moved across the paper, tentative at first, then, with growing confidence. Michael spoke of his life with Sarah, of the emptiness after her death, of his gradual return to the world, of the living through his work with rescued art. Elise listened and watched, her artist's eye noting the way emotion shaped his expressions, the depth that sorrow and resilience had carved into his features. Outside, rain began to fall again, creating a gentle soundtrack to their quiet exchange of stories. Emma's portrait watched over them from its place on the wall, a silent witness to this unexpected communion between two people connected by loss and a painting's improbable journey. When Elise finally set down her charcoal, hours had passed. She stepped back from the easel, studying what she had created, not merely a likeness of Michael, but a portrait that captured the gentle strength in his eyes, the hard-won wisdom in the lines of his face. "May I see?" he asked. Elise nodded, turning the easel toward him. Michael's breath caught as he saw himself through her eyes, more complex, more whole than he had felt in years. "That's how Sarah would have seen me," he said softly, "before everything happened, like I was still complete." "Maybe you are," Elise replied. "Maybe we both are. Just differently than before." They finally opened the fire report the next morning. Elise had invited Michael for coffee, and the manila envelope sat between them on her kitchen island like a live thing, demanding attention. "Ready?" Michael asked as Elise turned the last page of the official report. She nodded, sliding the document toward him. "According to this, the fire started in the kitchen, faulty wiring in the wall, not candles like I thought. It spread through the main floor, up the central staircase, and across the front of the second floor." Michael studied the schematic of the house included in the report, and Emma's room was here, at the back. He pointed to the floor plan. The fire spread in a U-shape. Her room was the last to be affected. "That explains why the painting survived long enough to be rescued," Elise said. "But there's something else." She pulled out another document, the roster of responding firefighters. "Sarah's name is here, Sarah Tanner, first response team." Michael touched his late wife's name on the page. "Yes, she was on shift that night, but look at the timeline." Elise pointed to another section. "The first team arrived at 10:42 p.m. I was already outside. A neighbor had pulled me out. By 11:17, they declared the house too dangerous to enter." It says here that at 11:23, firefighter Tanner returned to the structure against orders to investigate a potential victim. "That sounds like Sarah," Michael said softly. "She always trusted her instincts, even when they contradicted protocol." "But I was accounted for," Elise frowned. "The report clearly states I was safely outside. Why would she think someone was still in there?" They both fell silent, considering the mystery. Finally, Michael spoke. "Could there have been something else? Something that sounded like a voice, but wasn't?" Elise shook her head, then suddenly stilled. Wait, my phone. I left my phone in Emma's room earlier that evening. I'd been sitting there, looking at photos of her, and got a call from my gallery. I set the phone down and forgot it when I went downstairs. Would it have been ringing? Michael asked. Maybe. Elise's eyes widened with realization. Richard, my ex-husband, he always called on the anniversary. Even after we separated, he called to check on me, to share the grief for a few minutes. So your phone might have been ringing in Emma's room. And Sarah heard it and thought someone was trapped. Elise's voice grew quiet. She risked her life because of my phone. No, Michael said firmly. She risked her life because that's who she was. The phone might have been the trigger, but saving people and the things that mattered to them was her purpose. Elise wasn't comforted. But if I hadn't left it there, then my wife wouldn't have found your daughter's portrait, Michael finished, and we wouldn't be sitting here now, 3 years later, talking about how their stories connect. The simple truth of that statement hung in the air between them. Every tragedy, every blessing, linked in a chain of cause and effect, too complex to unravel. There's more, Michael said after a moment, pulling another paper from the file. The medical report from when Sarah was pulled out of the house. She was carrying the painting, but she was also holding this. He pointed to an inventory list of items recovered from the scene. Elise leaned closer. A phone. My phone. Looks like it. The report says it was damaged but still periodically ringing. Elise sat back, stunned. So she heard my phone, went to investigate, found both it and the painting, and tried to save both. She closed her eyes briefly. She must have seen Emma's portrait and understood immediately what it meant. She would have, Michael agreed. Sarah lost her younger sister when they were teenagers. Car accident. She understood that kind of grief. Another connection, another thread in the tapestry they were uncovering. Elise opened her eyes and looked at Michael with new understanding. So your wife had also experienced the loss of a sister at a young age, she said softly. That's why you recognized something in my work, in my story. It wasn't just the painting itself, it was the loss behind it. Michael nodded slowly. I never made that connection consciously, but yes, I think you're right. When I stood in front of Emma's portrait, something resonated with my own experience, not just of losing Sarah, but of watching her grieve her sister all those years. They were quiet for a moment, absorbing the layers of connection that had brought them together. What happened to your phone? Michael asked eventually. Was it recovered after the fire? Yes, but it was too damaged to salvage any data. Insurance replaced it. Elise paused. I never knew Sarah was the one who found it. I assumed it had been catalogued with other debris. She would have understood its value, Michael said. Photos, messages, the digital memories we carry. Like she understood the value of the painting. Elise stood and walked to where Emma's portrait hung. She must have had to choose what she could carry out. The painting is large, awkward to handle, yet she managed both it and the phone. That was Sarah, Michael said, coming to stand beside her, always believing she could save one more thing, help one more person. Elise studied Emma's face on the canvas. They never met, yet they're connected now. Sarah, Emma, you, Mile, part of the same story. A story of loss, Michael observed, and recovery, Elise added. Don't forget that part. Later that day, they visited Sarah's grave. It was Michael's suggestion, a way to complete the circle. He said, the cemetery was on a hill overlooking the city, peaceful under a clearing sky. I don't come here as often as I should, Michael admitted as they walked between the rows of headstones. It never feels like she's really here. I understand, Elise said. I visit Emma's grave on her birthday and the anniversary, but otherwise, double quotes, she shrugged. She feels more present in her painting than in that place. They reached Sarah's headstone, simple gray granite with her name, dates, and the words she saved more than lives. Michael knelt to clear away some fallen leaves. I had that inscription added later, he said, after I realized how many people were affected by her actions beyond the obvious rescues, the lives she touched by preserving memories, keepsakes, the things that connect us to those we've lost. Elise placed the small bouquet of flowers they'd brought against the stone. Thank you, she said simply, for Emma's portrait, for being exactly who you were. On the drive back, they were quiet, both lost in thought. The revelations of the day had shifted something between them, deepening their connection while clarifying its foundations. What now? Elise asked as Michael pulled up in front of her building. Dinner. he suggested with a small smile. I know a place that makes incredible risotto. Elise laughed, surprised by the ordinary nature of the invitation after the emotional weight of their day. Just like that. We move from uncovering our intertwined past to creating a present, Michael finished. Isn't that what all this has been leading toward? Finding a way forward. Elise considered his words, then nodded. Risotto sounds perfect. Good, Michael said, because I think Sarah and Emma would both approve of us choosing to live, not just remember. As they walked toward the restaurant, their hands brushed, then linked, a new connection forming from all that had been lost and found. A week passed, then two. Elise and Michael fell into an easy rhythm of shared meals, long conversations, and comfortable silences. He showed her his favorite architectural landmarks in the city. She introduced him to her hidden sketching spots in parks and cafes. They were careful with each other, respectful of the grief that had shaped them both, yet increasingly open to the possibility of joy. Elise began painting again, small works at first, studies of light and color that made no demands on her heart. The portrait of Michael remained on her easel, not quite finished but promising. Something was still missing. Some essential truths she hadn't yet captured. I have a proposition for you, Michael said one evening, as they walked along the riverfront. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. It might seem forward, but I've been thinking about it for days. Elise gave him a sidelong glance. That sounds ominous. He laughed. Not at all. It's just I have this house. A big old Victorian on the north side. Too much space for one person, really. You're not going to ask me to move in, Elise said, half joking, half wary. We barely know each other. No, Michael assured her quickly. Nothing like that. The house has a carriage house in Bacchum, completely separate, with its own entrance. I converted it into a studio when Sarah and I first bought the place. She used it for photography. I used it for drafting. After she died, I couldn't bring myself to go in there. He paused. It has amazing light, north-facing windows, skylights. It would be a perfect painting studio. Elise stopped walking. You want me to use your carriage house as a studio? Michael nodded. Your apartment is beautiful, but the space is limited. For larger works, you need room to step back, to see the whole canvas from a distance. I haven't committed to larger works yet, Elise pointed out. But you will, Michael said with quiet certainty. I can see it building in you, the need to create on a scale that matches what you're feeling. Elise couldn't deny it. Her small studies had begun to feel constraining, like she was holding back essential truths. I'd pay rent, of course, she said, already considering the possibility. Michael shook his head. I don't need rent. The space is sitting empty, gathering dust. I need someone to bring it back to life. He hesitated. And selfishly, I'd like that someone to be you. The admission hung between them, honest and unadorned. Let me see it first, Elise said finally. Before I decide, of course. Tomorrow. I could pick you up around 10. They resumed walking, their pace slower now, thoughtful. After a few minutes, Elise spoke again. It's not just about studio space, is it? Michael was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. No, he admitted finally. It's about purpose. Since Sarah died, I've been drifting, consulting on restoration projects, helping Marcus at the gallery, meaningful work. But not mine. Not fully. He looked out over the river, its surface, reflecting the city lights. When I see you painting, I remember what it feels like to create something new, to build rather than just preserve. And you think having me in your carriage house studio will help you find that again. I think having your energy nearby might help me remember who I was before grief became my defining characteristic. His honesty was disarming. Is that asking too much? Elise considered his words, recognizing in them her own journey of the past weeks. No, she said softly. It's not too much. It might even be exactly right. The next morning, Michael drove her to his home, a stately Victorian, with a wide porch and intricate gingerbread trim, painted a deep blue-gray with cream accents. The neighborhood was quieter than Elise had expected, tree-lined streets creating a sense of privacy despite being in the city. It's beautiful, she said, as they walked up the front steps. How long have you had it? Almost 10 years? Sarah and I bought it when it was barely standing, broken windows, sagging porch, the works. We spent 3 years restoring it ourselves, nights and weekends. Pride colored his voice. It was our shared passion project. Inside, the house was spacious and warm, with hardwood floors and high ceilings. Michael had furnished it simply but elegantly comfortable seating, bookshelves filled with architecture volumes and novels, walls adorned with art that revealed a sophisticated eye. No clutter, but not sterile either, a lived-in space that reflected its owner's appreciation for both form and function. Sarah's influence is everywhere, Michael said, noting Elise's attention to the details. She had an incredible sense of color and light. As an architect, I focused on structure. She taught me to think about how spaces feel. Photographs were displayed selectively. Sarah, in her firefighter uniform. Sarah and Michael on hiking trips. Sarah with her arm around an older woman who shared her eyes and smile. Her mother, Michael explained. Still living, up in Maine. We talk every few weeks. She's been worried about me being alone in this big house. They moved through the main floor, then out the back door to a garden that had been carefully designed to look natural and a little wild. At the rear of the property stood the carriage house, a two-story structure, with the same architectural details as the main house. It has its own heating and cooling system, Michael said as he unlocked the door. You could work here in any weather. The ground floor had been converted into a single large room with concrete floors, white walls, and the promised abundance of natural light. Built-in storage lined one wall, with a utility sink in the corner. A spiral staircase led to a small, loft area with a daybed and mini refrigerator. For when inspiration strikes and you don't want to leave mid-process, Michael explained. Sarah used to work through the night sometimes, developing photographs in the darkroom we set up downstairs. Elise walked the space slowly, feeling its possibilities. The emptiness felt expectant rather than abandoned, as if the room itself had been waiting for a new purpose. What happened to Sarah's equipment? She asked. Her photographs, her camera, gear, went to her mentee, a young woman she was training. The photographs. Michael gestured to a cedar chest in the loft. They're all preserved there. I couldn't bear to display them, but I couldn't let them go either. Elise nodded, understanding completely. And you're sure you want someone else, working in her space? It won't be painful for you. Michael leaned against the wall, considering her question seriously. I think it would be more painful to let it remain empty. Sarah filled everything she touched with life and purpose. She would hate to see this space gathering dust. He looked directly at Elise. And I think she would approve of you being the one to bring it back to life. Elise moved to the large north window, testing the quality of light with her artist's eye. It is perfect, she admitted. Better than any studio I've had before. Then say yes, Michael urged. Use it for as long as you need. No pressure, no expectations, just a space to create. Elise turned back to him, making her decision. On one condition. Name it. You show me your work, your architectural drawings, your designs, whatever you've been avoiding since Sarah died. Michael's expression registered surprise, then understanding. Reciprocity, he said. You want me to create again, too. Not just for my sake, Elise clarified, but because you're right, we've both been defining ourselves by our grief for too long. If I'm going to start painting seriously again, you should return to what you love too. She expected hesitation, negotiation perhaps. Instead, Michael crossed the room and offered his hand. Deal, he said simply. They shook on it. A pact between two artists finding their way back to their essential selves. As they were leaving the carriage house, Elise paused in the doorway. I have one more question. Yes. Why did you really invite me to use this space? The complete truth. Michael considered her for a long moment. Because when I saw your portrait of Emma, I recognized an artist who could see people's souls. And when you sketched me in the park that day, for the first time in years, I felt seen. He paused. I want to see what you'll create when you have everything you need to fully express what you see in the world. That's the selfish truth. Elise nodded, satisfied with his honesty. I'll bring my supplies tomorrow, she said, and I expect to see your drafting table set up by the end of the week. Yes, ma'am, Michael replied with a mock salute. But his eyes were bright with something like hope. As they walked back toward the main house, Elise felt a familiar stirring in her mind at the beginning of a creative vision. Images and colors arranging themselves, demanding expression. For the first time in years, she didn't try to suppress it. Instead, she welcomed the gentle insistence of her artistic voice, awakening after its long silence. The carriage house transformed under Elise's influence. Within days, the pristine white space became a working artist's studio, easels positioned to catch the best light. Canvases, in various stages of completion, leaning against walls, the organized chaos of paint tubes and brushes claiming every surface. The scent of linseed oil and turpentine replaced the emptiness that had lingered there for years. Michael kept his promise in a corner of his dining room. He set up his drafting table, unearthed from the attic where it had been stored since Sarah's death. At first, he sat before it for just minutes at a time, pencil in hand, paralyzed by the blankness of the paper. But gradually, hesitantly, lines began to appear, the skeleton of a building taking shape under his careful hand. They settled into a comfortable routine. Mornings, Elise would arrive with coffee for them both. They'd talk briefly about their plans for the day, then retreat to their respective creative spaces. Sometimes they'd meet for lunch on the back porch, sharing observations about their work or simply enjoying the companionable silence. Evenings often found them discussing art and architecture over dinner, either at Michael's kitchen island or at one of the neighborhood restaurants they'd begun to frequent. It was during one such evening, nearly a month after Elise had begun using the studio, that the past intruded on their carefully constructed present. They were walking back from dinner, the autumn night crisp around them, when Elise's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, then stopped abruptly. "Richard," she said, her voice tight. "My ex-husband." Michael nodded. "Take it, I'll give you privacy." He moved a few steps away as Elise answered. From the tension in her posture and the clipped nature of her responses, he could tell the conversation wasn't pleasant. When she rejoined him, her expression was troubled. "Everything okay?" he asked. "No," she admitted. "Richard saw an announcement about a group show at the Lazarus Gallery. Marcus included one of my new pieces, The Harbor Sunrise I finished last week. Richard wants to discuss it." "Why would your ex-husband care about you exhibiting again?" Elise sighed. "It's not about the exhibition. It's about Emma's portrait. He heard I recovered it somehow, and now he wants to ensure it's properly preserved." His words. "Does he have any legal claim to it?" "No. The painting was always mine. I created it, and I gave it to Emma. After she died, there was never any question about who it belonged to." Elise's face darkened. "But Richard has always been possessive about anything related to Emma. If his grief somehow trumped mine." "What did you tell him?" "That the painting is safe and well preserved. That I don't need his help." She shook her head. "He's coming to the gallery opening tomorrow night. He wants to see for himself." Michael recognized the worry behind her irritation. "Do you want me to come with you? For moral support?" The relief in her eyes was immediate. "Would you?" Richard can be difficult, especially when he feels entitled to something. "Of course," Michael said simply. "Whatever you need." The gallery opening was busier than Elise had expected. Marcus Chen had organized the exhibition around the theme of rebirth, featuring artists who had returned to their craft after significant absences. Elise's small seascape hung alongside works by a sculptor who had lost his right hand and learned to create with his left, a photographer recovering from brain surgery, a painter who had fled political persecution. "It's about resilience," Marcus explained as he guided Elise and Michael through the exhibition. "The human need to create, regardless of circumstance." Elise was studying the work of the brain surgery survivor when she felt a familiar presence behind her. "I see you've found your way back to painting," Richard said, his voice carrying the same blend of condescension and charm she remembered from their marriage. "Small works, though, playing it safe." She turned to face her ex-husband. At 52, Richard Reynolds still carried himself with the confidence of the successful attorney. He was tailored suit, perfectly groomed silver hair, watchful blue eyes that assessed everything as potential evidence. "Hello, Richard," Elise said evenly. "Yes, I'm painting again. And I'm starting with smaller canvases as I rebuild my technique." Richard's gaze shifted to Michael, who stood protectively at Elise's side. "And who's this?" "Michael Tanner." Michael introduced himself, extending his hand. "A friend of Elise's." Richard shook his hand perfunctorily, dismissing him almost immediately. "I need to speak with you privately," he said to Elise. "About Emma's portrait." "There's nothing to discuss," Elise replied. "The painting is safe. It's where it should be." "I disagree." Richard's voice lowered. "That painting is the most significant reminder of our daughter. It should be properly displayed, not hidden away in your apartment." "It's not hidden," Elise said, feeling her temper rise. "It's in my home, where I can see it every day. Our daughter's memory deserves better than to be a personal keepsake." Richard's voice had taken on the persuasive tone he used in courtrooms. I've been in discussions with the Modern Museum about a special exhibition on grief and art. Emma's portrait would be the centerpiece, a testimony to her life and the talent she inherited from you. You've been discussing my painting with the museum without consulting me. Elise's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby patrons. You have no right. I have every right as her father, Richard countered. And if you won't be reasonable about sharing this part of her legacy, I'll pursue other options. Michael stepped forward. Mr. Reynolds, perhaps this isn't the appropriate venue for this discussion. Richard's cold gaze settled on him. And perhaps you aren't a relevant party to this conversation. Mr. Tanna, this is between me and my wife. Ex-wife Elise corrected sharply. And Michael is absolutely relevant. He's the one who found Emma's portrait and returned it to me. Interest flickered in Richard's eyes. Found it? What do you mean, found it? Elise realized her mistake immediately. She'd never told Richard the painting had survived the fire. The portrait survived the house fire, Michael explained calmly. It was rescued by a firefighter who recognized its importance, and you just happened to find it. Richard's attorney instincts were clearly engaged now, probing for inconsistencies. How convenient. There was nothing convenient about it, Michael replied, his voice steady. It was the result of extraordinary circumstances and a lot of searching. Richard turned back to Elise. So this painting, the most valuable reminder of our daughter, has been in your possession for how long without you informing me? I don't need to inform you of anything, Richard. We're divorced, and the painting is mine. We'll see about that. Richard's voice was cold. Expect to hear from my attorney. That painting is part of Emma's legacy, and I intend to ensure it's properly honored. As he walked away, Elise felt her hands shaking. I'm sorry, she said to Michael. I didn't mean to drag you into this. You didn't drag me anywhere, he assured her. I'm exactly where I want to be. Marcus approached, concern evident on his face. Is everything all right? That looked intense. My ex-husband is threatening legal action over Emma's portrait, Elise explained. Marcus frowned. That could be problematic. The painting's provenance is unusual, given the circumstances of its recovery. What do you mean? Michael asked. Well, technically, after the fire, the insurance company paid out for all lost items, including artwork. In a strict legal sense, they might have a claim on anything subsequently recovered. Marcus held up his hands at their alarmed expressions. I'm not saying they would pursue it, just that the legal ownership might be ... complicated. Elise felt the ground shifting beneath her. He wouldn't dare. Richard is an attorney who specializes in property disputes, she continued. If there's a legal angle, he'll find it, not because he cares about the painting itself, but because he never could stand losing control. Michael placed a steadying hand on her arm. Then, we'll be prepared. We'll figure this out. Despite his reassurance, Elise couldn't shake the shadow that had fallen over her evening. The portrait that had come back to her against impossible odds might be taken away again, not by fire or fate, but by the calculated actions of the man who had once shared her life and her loss. 2 days after the gallery opening, Elise received the anticipated letter from Richard's attorney. The legal language was dense, but the essence was clear. Richard was asserting a claim to Emma's portrait based on both his parental relationship and the insurance settlement that had legally transferred ownership of all lost items to the insurance company. He proposed a reasonable solution. The painting would be donated to the Modern Museum in both their names, preserving Emma's memory while avoiding a protracted legal battle. Elise read the letter 3 times at her kitchen table, then called Michael. He's trying to intimidate me, she said when he answered. He knows I can't afford a legal fight. Don't respond yet, Michael advised. I've contacted a friend who specializes in art law. She's willing to meet with us tomorrow. The attorney, Amara Jones, had an office filled with art rather than the law books and certificates Elise had expected. Colorful, abstract paintings covered the walls, and sculpture pieces served as bookends on her shelves. Art law found me, not the other way around, Amara explained, noting Elise's interest in her collection. I was an art history major who went to law school to pay the bills. Ended up finding a niche representing artists and collectors. She tapped Richard's letter on her desk. Now, this situation is unusual but not unprecedented. Can he really claim ownership of the painting? Elise asked. It's complicated, Amara admitted. Technically, once the insurance company paid out for the lost artwork, they became the legal owners of anything subsequently recovered. However, most insurance companies aren't interested in recovering art unless it's extremely valuable in monetary terms. Emma's portrait is priceless to me, but it wouldn't be worth much on the market, Elise said. Exactly, which is why your ex-husband's claim is creative, shall we say. He's leveraging the insurance angle, but his real claim is a right as a father to determine how his daughter's image is preserved and displayed. So what can we do? Michael asked. Amara leaned back in her chair, thoughtful. We could fight it, and we might win. But it would be expensive and emotionally draining. She looked directly at Elise. There might be another approach, though. One that addresses the underlying issue while keeping you in control. I'm listening, Elise said. Create an exhibition of your own, not just Emma's portrait, but new work inspired by loss, memory, recovery. Tell the story your way, not his. Amara smiled. I know the director of the Gardner Center. They have a program specifically for local artists, exploring personal narratives. Your story, the lost painting, its recovery, your return to art would be perfect. An exhibition. Elise's voice betrayed her uncertainty. I've only just started painting again. Most of my new work is small, experimental. That's part of the story, Amara insisted. The journey back to art after trauma. The small steps, the exploration. She turned to Michael. And from what you've told me, there's a remarkable narrative connecting all of this: the firefighter who saved the painting, her connection to you, your search that led to Elise. Michael nodded. It is an extraordinary chain of events. People respond to stories, Amara continued. An exhibition that traces this journey from Emma's original portrait through the fire, the rescue, the years of separation, to the recovery, and what comes next. That's compelling. It gives Emma's portrait context and purpose beyond being simply displayed as a memorial. Elise considered the idea, her artist's mind already envisioning how such an exhibition might be arranged. It would need to include Sarah somehow, she said, glancing at Michael. Her role in saving the painting. Absolutely, Amara agreed. The exhibition becomes not just about your loss, but about connection, how grief can create unexpected bonds across time and circumstance. And Richard's claim? Michael asked. We respond to his attorney with our plan for the exhibition, emphasizing how it honors Emma's memory more fully than a static display ever could. We acknowledge his concern for preserving Emma's legacy while asserting your creative control as both her mother and the artist. Amara's expression was confident. It's harder for him to fight against something that ostensibly achieves his stated goal of honoring Emma publicly. After they left Amara's office, Elise and Michael walked through the sculpture garden outside, processing the proposal. What do you think? Michael asked. Elise watched a group of schoolchildren gathered around a bronze figure, their faces upturned in wonder. It's terrifying, she admitted. Exhibiting again, at this scale, making myself that vulnerable. But it also feels right. She turned to him. Emma would have loved the idea of her portrait being part of a bigger story, not just a memorial to what was lost. And you'd be reclaiming your voice as an artist, Michael observed. Not just responding to Richard's demands. Yes. Elise's determination grew as she considered the possibility. I could include some of the preliminary sketches we found in storage. Maybe even create companion pieces showing who Emma might have become. What about Sarah? Michael asked quietly. How would you include her? Elise thought for a moment. With your permission, I'd like to see her photographs. Maybe there's a way to create a dialogue between her images and my paintings to artists whose work connected even before they did. The idea grew between them as they walked, taking shape and dimension like one of Elise's paintings coming to life on canvas. By the time they returned to Michael's house, the exhibition had evolved from Amara's tactical suggestion into a genuine creative vision. That evening, Michael brought the cedar chest down from the carriage house loft and opened it for the first time in years. Inside, carefully preserved in archival boxes, were Sarah's photographs, hundreds of images documenting her unique perspective on the world. She had an eye for moments of transition, Michael explained as they looked through the collections. Dawn, dusk, changing seasons, thresholds of all kinds. The photographs were stunning, technically precise yet emotionally resonant. Many featured architecture and states of renovation or decay, capturing beauty in the tension between what had been and what might be. She would have loved your paintings, Michael said softly, especially the new ones. Elise nodded, seeing the aesthetic connection between Sarah's images and her own recent work. There's a conversation happening here, she observed, between her vision and mine. The next day, Elise called Marcus Chen at the Lazarus Gallery to discuss the exhibition concept. His enthusiasm was immediate. "This is exactly the kind of story our gallery was founded to tell," he said. "Art surviving against the odds, creating connections across time and loss." He paused, "But the Gardner Center would reach a wider audience. We should approach them together." Events moved quickly after that. The Gardner Center's director, Lydia Oakes, was captivated by the concept Elise, Michael, and Marcus presented. She immediately offered a slot in their upcoming season, suggesting they aim for an opening in 4 months. "Enough time to create new work," she said to Elise, "while the emotional thread of the story remains fresh." When Amara submitted their formal response to Richard's attorney, outlining the planned exhibition and offering him acknowledgement as Emma's father in all materials, his reply was surprisingly he would withdraw his legal claim, provided he could review the exhibition text before it went public and attend a private viewing before the opening. "He's saving face," Amara explained. "But this is a win. You maintain ownership and creative control, while he gets the public recognition of Emma he wanted." As Elise stood in the Carriage House studio that evening, surrounded by canvases in various stages of completion, she felt a complex mix of emotions: anxiety about the exhibition timeline, lingering anger at Richard's intrusion, but predominantly a sense of purpose that had been missing from her life for years. On her primary easel, Emma's portrait gazed out with those wise amber eyes, now seeming not just to remember the past but to look toward the future where her image would help tell a story of loss, connection, and the enduring power of art to preserve what matters most. The exhibition deadline transformed Elise's approach to her work, where before she had painted tentatively, testing her voice after years of silence, now she created with focused intensity. The Carriage House studio became her world, days stretching into nights, meals forgotten until Michael would appear with sandwiches and tea, gently insisting she take breaks. "You won't be able to finish if you collapse," he reminded her one evening when he found her still working at midnight, surrounded by coffee cups and discarded sketches. "There's so much to do," Elise said, not looking up from her canvas. For months seemed like plenty of time, but now, Michael crossed the studio and gently took the brush from her hand. "Come on, 10 minutes, fresh air, then you can return with clear eyes." Outside, the night was cool and quiet. They walked the perimeter of Michael's garden, where late autumn flowers still bloomed under the porch light. "I'm afraid," Elise admitted, as they completed their second circuit. "Afraid I won't be able to create work worthy of being exhibited alongside Emma's portrait. Afraid of making myself that vulnerable in public." Michael nodded, understanding. "Sarah used to say that the best photographs are the ones that terrify you to share because they reveal something true about yourself. Not just your subject." "Your wife was very wise," Elise said softly. "Yes, but that didn't make it any easier for her to exhibit her work. She used to get physically ill before openings." Michael smiled at the memory. "Then she'd stand there all evening, looking completely composed, while strangers analyzed her most personal images. How did she manage it?" "She focused on why she had created the work in the first place, not for validation or recognition, but because she had something essential to express." He looked at Elise. "Why are you doing this exhibition?" Beyond responding to Richard's legal challenge, Elise considered the question, watching her breath form clouds in the night air. "To honor Emma, yes, but also to reclaim my voice. To acknowledge that grief changed but didn't end me." She paused. "And to tell the story of how her portrait connected Usumi Sarah, how loss became the foundation for something new." "Then paint that truth," Michael said simply, "and trust it to be enough." They returned to the studio, where Elise worked for another hour before finally allowing exhaustion to claim her. In the small loft above the studio, she slept dreamlessly, on the daybed that Michael had made more comfortable with new linens and pillows, creating a place where she could rest without leaving her creative space. The next morning brought rain and a renewed sense of purpose. Elise stood before the largest canvas she had attempted since before the Fiara, 6-foot expanse of primed linen waiting for her vision to take form. She had been avoiding it for days, working instead on smaller companion pieces to Emma's portrait. Today, she said aloud to the empty studio, "No more procrastinating." The painting that emerged over the following week became the centerpiece of her new collection, depicting the journey of Emma's portrait through fire, darkness and return. The left panel showed flames, fragmented and abstracted, with the suggestion of a frame barely visible within the chaos. The center panel depicted a void of negative space, where ghostly hands reached through darkness, one bearing a badge that subtly evoked Sarah's firefighter insignia. The right panel showed dawn breaking over water, with the portrait reflected not as it was, but transformed Emma's face, maturing into the woman she never had the chance to become. When Michael first saw the completed triptych, he stood silent for so long that Elise grew nervous. "Is it too much?" she asked. "Too literal?" He shook his head, eyes still fixed on the painting. "It's perfect," he said finally. "It tells the whole story without a single word." The triptych became the anchor for the exhibition, with Emma's original portrait and smaller works arranged in relation to it. As the collection grew, Michael contributed in unexpected ways, building custom frames for some pieces, constructing display elements that would guide visitors through the narrative, even helping select which of Sarah's photographs would create dialogue with Elise's paintings. "We should include this one," he said one afternoon, holding up a photograph Sarah had taken of a partially demolished building. Through a missing wall, sunrise illuminated an intact room with a single chair, somehow spared from the destruction around it. "It's perfect," Elise agreed. The conversation between destruction and preservation. "Sarah called it what remains," Michael said. Reading from the notation on the back, they worked together to curate a cohesive story. Elise's artistic vision complemented by Michael's architectural sense of space and movement. The exhibition took shape not just as a collection of art, but as a journey through loss and recovery. December arrived with snow and increasing pressure. As the exhibition date approached, Lydia from the Gardner Center visited the studio to review their progress, bringing with her a writer who would create the exhibition catalog. "This is extraordinary," Lydia said as she moved through the space, studying the nearly completed collection. The conversation between the paintings and photographs, the way each piece builds on the narrative. She turned to Elise. "You've created something truly remarkable here." The writer, a soft-spoken woman named May, spent hours interviewing both Elise and Michael, recording their accounts of how Emma's portrait had been lost and found, how Sarah's brave act had created a connection that spanned years. "May I ask something personal?" May inquired after her formal questions were complete. "How has creating this exhibition affected your relationship with grief?" Both of you, Elise and Michael, exchanged glances, neither immediately answering. "It hasn't diminished it," Elise said finally, "but it's changed how grief fits into my life. Before, it was like carrying a stone that got heavier each day. Now, it's more like a river that carves new channels, creating rather than just eroding." Michael nodded. "For me, grief had become an identity, the widower, the man left behind. This project has helped me see myself as more than that, while still honoring Sarah's memory." May noted their responses with evident appreciation. "That's what comes through in the work, not an ending to grief, but a transformation of it into something generative." As the exhibition opening drew nearer, practical concerns dominated their days. Frames needed finishing, artist statements required refining, and the logistics of transporting everything to the Gardner Center demanded attention. Through it all, Michael remained Elise's steadfast support, handling details she was too creatively absorbed to notice, ensuring she ate and rested, providing the calm presence she needed when anxiety threatened to overwhelm her. 1 week before the installation was to begin, they received word that Richard had requested his private viewing. Amara advised scheduling it as late as possible to minimize the possibility of last-minute demands for changes. "The exhibition is legally and creatively yours," she reminded Elise. "His viewing is a courtesy, not an opportunity for input." Night before Richard's scheduled visit, Elise worked later than usual, making final adjustments to the arrangement of smaller works surrounding Emma's portrait. When she finally stopped, the studio clock showed 2:17 a.m. Too wired to sleep despite her exhaustion, she climbed the spiral staircase to the loft and settled on the daybed, sketchbook in hand. Outside, snow fell silently, visible through the skylight above. The quiet was absolute, a rare moment of stillness in what had been months of intense creative output. Elise found herself drawing Michael's profile from memory, the thoughtful set of his mouth, the watchful kindness in his eyes. Under her pencil, his face emerged with the same care she had once devoted to capturing Emma's essence. Without consciously deciding to, she was creating a portrait of a man who had become essential to her life, The realization didn't surprise her as much as she might have expected. Somewhere in the midst of preparing the exhibition, their careful friendship had deepened into something more profound. They hadn't spoken of it directly, both perhaps wary of disrupting the delicate balance they had achieved, but it existed in small gestures, his hand at the small of her back as they reviewed the exhibition layout, her fingers lingering on his when she passed him a coffee mug, the way they had begun to anticipate each other's thoughts. As dawn approached, Elise finally set aside her sketchbook and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would bring Richard's scrutiny and potential conflict, but for now, in this quiet moment between night and morning, she allowed herself to acknowledge the unexpected gift that had emerged from all their loss, the possibility of a future neither of them had imagined possible when Emma's portrait first brought them together. Richard arrived at the studio precisely at the appointed time. Dressed in a tailored overcoat and carrying a leather portfolio, Elise had deliberately asked Michael to be present, both for moral support and as a witness to whatever might transpire. "Thank you for accommodating this visit," Richard said with the practiced courtesy he reserved for professional situations. His gaze swept the studio, taking in the organized chaos of Elise's creative space, before settling on the exhibition pieces arranged against the far wall. "The exhibition opens in 10 days, Elise reminded him. "Everything is finalized." Richard nodded, unbuttoning his coat. "I understand. I'm simply here to ensure Emma's memory is being properly honored." The emphasis he placed on properly carried a subtle threat. "Please," Michael said, gesturing toward the display. "Take your time." For nearly 20 minutes, Richard moved silently through the collection, studying each piece with the same methodical attention he brought to legal briefs. His expression revealed nothing as he examined the triptych, the companion pieces to Emma's portrait, the carefully selected photographs of Sarah's that created visual dialogue with Elise's paintings. When he finally stood before Emma's original portrait, his composure faltered slightly. Elise saw his hand twitch at his side, as if he might reach out to touch the canvas. "You've captured her," he said quietly. "I'd forgotten how perfectly you captured her." The simple admission cracked the defensive shell Elise had constructed for this meeting. Whatever else Richard had become in the years since their divorce, he was still Emma's father, still someone who carried the weight of her absence every day. "That was always your gift," he continued, still looking at the portrait, seeing beyond the surface. "Thank you," Elise said, uncertain how to navigate this unexpected vulnerability from her usually guarded ex-husband. Richard turned from the portrait, his professional mask settling back into place. "The exhibition concept is sound. The narrative flow works well." He opened his portfolio and extracted a document. "However, I have some concerns about the proposed text for the catalog." Elise exchanged a glance with Michael. There was the confrontation they had been expecting. "What concerns?" Michael asked, keeping his voice neutral. "The language describing the painting's recovery is vague. It mentions a heroic firefighter, but doesn't properly acknowledge the extraordinary circumstances." Richard held out the document, which Elise saw was a marked-up copy of the catalog draft. "I've suggested revisions that clarify the legal and personal significance of the painting's journey." Elise took the document, skimming his annotations. To her surprise, Richard's proposed changes were largely reasonably emphasizing Emma's relationship with both her parents, acknowledging the insurance company's technical ownership, noting the legal complexity that had been resolved through the creation of the exhibition. "These are actually helpful," she admitted reluctantly. Richard nodded. "I am an attorney, Elise. Precision in language matters to me." He paused, "and Emma's memory matters more." The simple sincerity in his voice disarmed her further. This wasn't the manipulative ex-husband she had expected, but the man she had once loved, the father who had sat beside her at their daughter's bedside, reading Harry Potter long after she had fallen asleep. "I have one other request," Richard said, reaching again into his portfolio. "I'd like to include this in the exhibition." He withdrew a small, worn sketchbook and handed it to Elise. She recognized it immediately, the journal she had given Emma for her 15th birthday, encouraging her to try drawing as a way to process her thoughts. "Where did you get this?" Elise asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought it was lost in the fire." "Emma left it at my place the weekend before." Richard's voice grew quiet. "She was staying with me while you were at that gallery opening in Chicago. She forgot it when I drove her home on Sunday." Elise opened the sketchbook with trembling hands. Inside were Emma's attempts at drawing awkward but earnest portraits of friends, still lifes of objects in her room, landscapes from the park near Richard's apartment. Between the sketches were journal entries, brief glimpses into their daughter's inner world. I've kept it private all these years, Richard explained. It felt too personal to share. But seeing what you're creating, hear this narrative of connection and memory, it seems right that her own artistic voice should be included. Elise looked up at her ex-husband, seeing him anew. Yes, she agreed. It absolutely should be included. The tension that had defined their interaction for years seemed to ease slightly. Not gone, but transformed by their shared recognition of what mattered most, preserving Emma's memory with dignity and truth. I'll have May revise the catalog text based on your suggestions, Elise said, gesturing to the marked-up document, and we'll create a special display for Emma's sketchbook. Thank you, Richard said simply. As he prepared to leave, he paused before Michael. Mr. Tanner, I owe you an apology for my behavior at the gallery opening. I was caught off guard by the situation. Michael nodded his acceptance. Understandable, under the circumstances. Your wife's role in saving Emma's portrait deserves proper recognition, Richard continued. I've suggested language in the catalog that honors her sacrifice more explicitly. Appreciate that, Michael said. At the door, Richard turned back to Elise. The exhibition will be quite powerful. You've done good work here. He hesitated, then added, Emma would be proud of you, of how you've transformed your grief into something beautiful. After he left, Elise and Michael stood in silence for a long moment, processing the unexpected turn the meeting had taken. Well, Michael said finally, that was not what I expected. No, Elise agreed. It wasn't. She looked down at Emma's sketchbook, still clutched in her hands. People can surprise you, I suppose. Even after all these years, the following week brought a flurry of activity as they prepared for installation at the Gardner Center. The revised catalog text incorporated Richard's suggestions, alongside a new section featuring selected pages from Emma's sketchbook. The legal issues that had threatened to overshadow the exhibition faded into the background as the focus shifted to the art itself. Richard's attorney sent formal documentation withdrawing any claim to Emma's portrait, acknowledging Elise's full ownership while noting the painting's significant cultural and personal value to multiple parties. When Amara called to confirm that the legal matter was fully resolved, she couldn't hide her surprise at the outcome. I've rarely seen such a contentious situation resolved so amicably, she admitted, especially with ex-spouses involved. I think we both finally remembered what actually matters, Elise replied. Emma wouldn't have wanted her portrait to become a battleground. On the day before the exhibition opening, as they supervised the final installation, Elise found herself standing before the special display they had created for Emma's sketchbook. Michael joined her, his hand finding hers in a gesture that had become natural between them. Full circle, he observed. Her artistic voice alongside yours, and Sarah's, Elise added, nodding toward the photographs that completed the exhibition's narrative. All the pieces coming together, Michael said. Despite everything that tried to keep them apart, the morning of the exhibition opening dawned bright and cold, sunlight glinting off fresh snow. Elise woke early in her apartment, having returned there the night before to prepare for the day ahead. Everything was ready at the Gardner Center, the installation complete, the lighting perfect, the catalog printed and waiting. Yet anxiety coursed through her as she moved through her morning routine. This wasn't just another exhibition. It was her first public showing since before Emma's death, a vulnerable unveiling of not just her art but her journey through grief. Strangers would stand before her most personal work, studying the visual narrative of her loss and recovery. Critics would analyze her technique, perhaps comparing it unfavorably to her earlier work, and at the center of it all would be Emma, her daughter, her muse, her greatest loss, exposed to public view and interpretation. Elise's phone chimed with a text from Michael. Whatever you're thinking right now, stop. The work is extraordinary. Tonight will be perfect. I'll pick you up at 5. His message brought a smile to her face and calmed her racing thoughts. Over these months of preparation, Michael had developed an uncanny ability to sense her moments of doubt, offering precisely the reassurance she needed without minimizing her concerns. She texted back a simple thank you and returned to selecting her outfit for the evening. The black dress she had initially planned now seemed too somber, too much like funeral attire. Instead, she chose a deep blue wrap dress that Emma had always loved, the color echoing a shade used repeatedly in her new paintings. At precisely 5 o'clock, Michael arrived, looking distinguished in a charcoal suit and blue tie that complemented her dress with a synchronicity that made them both laugh. "Great minds," he said as she opened the door. "Or artists' eyes," she replied. "We're both drawn to the same palette." On the drive to the Gardner Center, Michael sensed her returning nervousness. "Tell me what you're most afraid of tonight," he said gently. Elise looked out at the passing city, lights beginning to glow as evening approached. "That people won't understand what the work means, that they'll see it as exploiting tragedy for artistic recognition, that Emma would be uncomfortable with being so exposed." Michael considered her words carefully. "The work speaks for itself, Elise. Anyone who spends time with it will understand its honesty. As for Emma double quotes," he paused. "From everything you've told me about her, she was brave and open-hearted. I think she'd be proud to be part of something that helps others understand grief and recovery." When they arrived at the Gardner Center, staff was making final preparations for the evening. Lydia Oakes greeted them in the entrance hall, elegant in a sculptural black dress. "Everything is perfect," she assured them. "We've already had media inquiries after the preview article in the Arts Journal. I think you should prepare for a significant turnout." Elise felt a fresh wave of anxiety at this news. "I was hoping for a quieter opening." "Success is never quiet," Lydia said with a smile. "But don't worry, we have security to ensure no one bothers the artwork, and a private room where you can retreat if it gets overwhelming." They walked through the exhibition space for a final review, seeing her work installed in the gallery, setting professionally lit, perfectly spaced. The narrative flow exactly as she had envisioned helped settle Elise's nerves. This was what she had been working toward all these months. Whatever happened, tonight, the exhibition itself was a triumph of resilience and creativity. "It's beautiful," she said softly to Michael as they stood before the triptych that anchored the collection. "Better than I imagined it would be." "Yes," he agreed. "It tells the whole story." At 7 o'clock, the doors opened to invited guests. Elise stood with Michael near the entrance, greeting the first arrivals: friends, fellow artists, gallery owners, and collectors who had supported her work before her long absence from the art world. Marcus Chen arrived with several patrons of the Lazarus Gallery. "I've been telling everyone this is the most important exhibition of the year," he said, embracing Elise warmly. "A true story of art's power to survive and connect." As the gallery filled, Elise found herself drawn into conversations about her technique, her inspiration, the story behind specific pieces. To her surprise, discussing the work became easier with each interaction. These weren't the painful exposures she had feared, but meaningful exchanges with people genuinely moved by the narrative she had created. Near Emma's portrait, a small crowd had gathered, speaking in hushed tones as they studied the young face that gazed out with such timeless wisdom. Elise approached cautiously, still protective of this most precious piece. "You're the artist," said an elderly woman who stood closest to the painting. "The mother." "Yes," Elise acknowledged. "I lost my son 40 years ago," the woman said, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "There were no portraits, only photographs that faded a little more each year. What you've created here," she gestured to the exhibition as a whole, "it's a gift to all of us who live with absence." Elise found herself speechless, touched by the simple truth of the woman's observation. Before she could respond, she felt a presence at her side and turned to find Richard, impeccably dressed and uncharacteristically subdued. "It's quite remarkable," he said, his gaze fixed on Emma's portrait. "The whole exhibition. You've outdone yourself, Elise." "Thank you," she replied, genuinely appreciative of his support, despite their complicated history. "Emma's sketchbook has been getting a lot of attention." Richard nodded. "As it should. Her voice deserves to be heard alongside yours." He hesitated, then added, "I've brought someone who wanted to see the exhibition. I hope that's all right." He gestured toward a woman standing a few feet away, tall, elegant, with a gentle face that immediately struck Elise as familiar. "This is Julia," Richard said, "Emma's nurse from the hospital." Elise's breath caught. Julia had been the night nurse during those final terrible days after the accident, the one who had brought extra chairs so Elise and Richard could both sleep in Emma's room, who had spoken to their unconscious daughter as if she could hear every word, who had wept openly with them when the end came. "Julia," Elise managed, stepping forward to embrace the woman. "I never expected." "How did you?" "Richard found me," Julia explained. "He thought I should see what you've created." Her eyes were warm with emotion. Emma would be so proud. Elise, this is exactly the kind of courage she admired. The unexpected appearance of this woman who had shared their darkest hours brought fresh tears to Elise's eyes. Julia had been a witness to their family at its most vulnerable, a guardian of Emma's dignity in her final moments. Her presence here tonight felt like a blessing, a connection between that time of acute loss and this moment of creative renewal. As the evening progressed, the gallery grew crowded, with visitors drawn by the exhibition's powerful narrative. Art critics moved thoughtfully through the space, taking notes. Photographers captured images for tomorrow's reviews. Collectors spoke quietly with Lydia about acquisition possibilities. Through it all, Michael remained close, sometimes at Elise's side during important conversations, sometimes giving her space when she needed it, always within sight when she looked for him. His steady presence anchored her amid the swirl of attention and emotion. Near the end of the evening, as the crowd began to thin, a young woman approached Elise with tears in her eyes. "Your daughter," she said softly. "In the portrait, she looks so much like my sister who died. The way you've captured her spirit, .. double quotes." She trailed off, overcome. "What was your sister's name?" Elise asked gently. "Lily," the young woman replied. "She was 16, the same age as Emma," Elise said. She took the young woman's hand. "Would you like to tell me about her?" As they moved to a quiet corner, where the young woman shared memories of her sister, Elise felt something shift within her, recognition that her most personal loss, translated into art, had created a space where others could find recognition, and perhaps some measure of peace in their own grief. This, she realized, was what she had been working toward all along, not just preserving Emma's memory or reclaiming her artistic voice, but creating connection through the honest expression of both loss and recovery. When the last guests had departed and only the exhibition team remained, Lydia approached with champagne flutes for Elise and Michael. "To an unqualified success," she said, raising her glass. "The critics are already calling it transformative." Elise accepted the praise with quiet gratitude, too emotionally drained to fully process the evening's significance. As they prepared to leave, Michael stopped before Emma's portrait for a final moment. "Thank you," he said softly to the painted image, "for bringing your mother back to art, and for leading me to her." The exhibition's success exceeded all expectations. Reviews praised Elise's technical skill and emotional honesty, with particular attention to the narrative thread connecting the works. The Gardner Center extended the show's run by 3 weeks, due to unprecedented attendance. Most meaningful to Elise were the comments in the visitors' book page after page, filled with stories of loss, resilience, and the healing power of art. 1 week after the opening, Michael invited Elise to dinner at his home. "Nothing fancy," he assured her. "Just a private celebration." She arrived to find the dining room transformed, candles lit, tables set with elegant simplicity, soft music playing. Michael had prepared the meal himself. She realized risotto with wild mushrooms, her favorite. "This is beautiful," she said, accepting the glass of wine he offered. "But you didn't have to go to such trouble." "It's not trouble when it matters," he replied, a phrase she recognized as one of Sarah's that he had shared with her. Throughout dinner, Michael seemed slightly distracted, his usual attentive conversation punctuated by moments of silence. Elise wondered if the exhibition's focus on Sarah had stirred difficult emotions for him. "Is everything all right?" she finally asked as they finished their meal. "You seem preoccupied." Michael nodded, setting down his napkin. "I've been trying to find the right moment for this." He stood and left the room briefly, returning with a small wooden box. "Something was delivered to me yesterday, from Sarah's mother in Maine." He placed the box on the table between them. It was a simple cedar container, worn smooth with age and handling. "Apparently, Sarah sent this to her mother shortly after the fire at your house, with instructions that it should be kept safe until ... He hesitated. "Until certain conditions were met." Elise looked at the box with growing curiosity. "What conditions?" "The letter explains it better than I can," Michael said, opening the box and extracting an envelope that had been sealed with wax, now broken. "Sarah's mother called me after seeing the news coverage of our exhibition. She said it was time." He handed Elise the letter, written in a flowing hand on pale blue stationery. The date at the top was 3 days after the fire that had claimed Elise's home. "My dearest Mom, I'm writing from the hospital, where things aren't going as well as I'd hoped. The doctors are concerned about my lungs, and there's an infection they're struggling to control. I'm trying to stay positive, but I need to prepare for the possibility that I won't recover as fully as we've been hoping. This brings me to the enclosed item and my request. During my last call, I was at a house fire where I found something extraordinary, a portrait of a young girl with the most remarkable amber eyes. There was something about her face that spoke to me, especially when I learned later that she had died the year before. The painting survived the fire almost miraculously, and I felt compelled to save it. Along with the phone I found ringing nearby, I've arranged for the painting to go to Marcus Chen at the Lazarus Gallery. He specializes in artwork recovered from disasters and will ensure it's properly preserved. What I'm entrusting to you is the companion piece, something I found fallen behind the painting, apparently stored with it but separated in the chaos. It's a letter from the artist to her daughter, written on the back of a preliminary sketch. I've sealed it in the archival envelope inside this box. Please keep it safe until either of these conditions is met. The artist, Elise Reynolds, is located and reclaims her daughter's portrait, or Michael finds his way to this painting and to her. I know this must sound strange, but I had a powerful feeling when I held this portrait in my arms, carrying it through the smoke. It felt like a message meant to be delivered, a connection waiting to be made. When I look at Michael lately, so lost in his work and disconnected from his heart, I sensed that somehow this painting and its creator might be important to his future. Long after I'm gone, call it firefighter's intuition, or perhaps just the medication making me fanciful. But I believe there's a purpose to why I was the one who found this artwork, why I felt so drawn to save it despite the risk. I love you, Mom. I love Michael with all my heart. If things don't improve for me, please help him find his way back to living fully, not just existing. And when the time is right, share this with him and with the artist, if she's found. All my love, Sarah. Elise looked up from the letter, tears blurring her vision. She knew, she whispered. Somehow, she knew. Michael nodded, his own eyes damp. Sarah always had an uncanny sense about connections between people, between moments in time. I used to tease her about it. He reached into the box and removed a small archival envelope. This is for you, he said, passing it to Elise. From Sarah, through her mother, through me, full circle. With trembling fingers, Elise opened the envelope. Inside was a sketch, one of her preliminary studies for Emma's portrait. She recognized it immediately, a detailed rendering of Emma's hands holding a small object. On the back, written in Elise's own hand, was a note she had forgotten writing. You asked me once what I see when I look at you. This is my answer. I see your hands, how they're always in motion, always creating or comforting or reaching out to connect. Your hands tell the story of who you are and who you're becoming. So much strength in these fingers that can both throw a softball and gently hold a frightened child at the hospital where you volunteer. So much possibility in these palms that might someday heal or build or make art of your own. Whatever path you choose, whatever you touch with these hands, I know it will be with purpose and compassion. That's who you are, in your bones and blood and beautiful heart. All my love, Mama Elise. Pressed the sketch to her chest. Overcome by this unexpected gift, her own words to her daughter, preserved against all odds and returned to her at precisely the moment she was ready to receive them. Sarah found this behind the portrait, she asked, struggling to comprehend the chain of events that had led to this moment. Apparently it had been stored with the painting, Michael explained. Perhaps fallen from a portfolio or drawer when the fire started. Elise studied the sketch again, remembering the day she had drawn Itima, sitting at the kitchen table, carefully constructing a model of DNA for her biology class, her hands precise and patient with the delicate work. I wrote this note when she was considering becoming a doctor, Elise said softly. She was worried she wasn't smart enough, that she'd fail. I wanted her to see her own capabilities the way I saw them. Michael reached across the table and took her hand. Sarah saw something important in both the portrait and this sketch. Important enough to risk her life for, to preserve even when her own future was uncertain. She created a connection across time, Elise said, understanding dawning, between her life and mine, between your future and my past. Yes, Michael agreed. And now her mother has completed the circle by sending this to us just as we've shared their stories through the exhibition. They sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the extraordinary nature of these connections, how Sarah's intuition and courage had set in motion events that would ultimately bring healing to both Elise and Michael, years after her death. What do we do with this? Elise finally asked, gently touching the sketch. It feels too significant to just file away. Michael considered the question. I think it belongs in the exhibition, he said. The final piece of the story we've been telling. The next day, they brought the sketch and Sarah's letter to Lydia at the Gardner Center. After reading both, she immediately agreed they should be included in the exhibition. We'll create a special display for the closing week, she said. The completion of the narrative arc. When the new display was unveiled, Sarah's letter alongside Elise's sketch and message to Emma visitors were visibly moved by this final chapter in the story. Many returned to view the exhibition again, to see how this new element transformed their understanding of the connections between Sarah, Emma, Michael, and Elise. A photographer from the Arts Journal captured the four of them standing together in a sense, Michael and Elise, before the display containing Sarah's words and the sketch of Emma's hands. The image became the defining visual of the exhibition, reproduced in reviews and articles about the power of art to transcend loss. On the final day of the exhibition, after the last visitors had departed, Elise and Michael stood alone in the gallery. The artwork would be carefully packed. Emma's portrait returning to Elise's apartment, the new paintings to various collectors who had purchased them, Sarah's photographs back to the cedar chest in Michael's home. It feels like an ending, Elise said, looking around the now familiar space, but also a beginning. Michael nodded, understanding as always. Sarah would say it's both the closing of one circle and the opening of another. As they walked through the gallery one last time, Elise paused before the special display containing Sarah's letter and her sketch of Emma's hands. Thank you, she whispered. The words meant for both the daughter she had lost and the woman she had never met, whose courage and intuition had created the bridge that connected her to a new chapter of her life. Michael's hand found hers in the quiet gallery, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. Together, they stood before the tangible evidence of how love persists beyond loss, how connection finds its way through fire and time, how art preserves what matters most when all else is swept away. Spring arrived with gentle persistence, melting the last traces of winter from Michael's garden. In the carriage house studio, Elise stood before a new canvas, larger than any she had attempted since the exhibition closed 2 months earlier. Sunlight streamed through the north-facing windows, illuminating the space that had become truly hers. The success of Phoenix Art from the Ashes had transformed her professional life. Galleries that had forgotten her name now called weekly with exhibition offers. Collectors sought her new work with an enthusiasm that still surprised her. Critics wrote about her triumphant return and evolved artistic vision. The Gardner Center had invited her to lead a series of workshops on art and healing. Yet, amid this professional renaissance, what mattered most to Elise was the personal transformation the exhibition had kept. The tightly held grief that had defined her for years had loosened its grip, allowing space for new experiences, new connections, new possibilities. Chief among these was her deepening relationship with Michael. What had begun as a chance encounter in a park had evolved into a partnership that neither could have imagined. To people shaped by loss, finding unexpected joy in each other's company. The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted her thoughts. Michael appeared in the doorway, carrying a large envelope. Special delivery, he said, crossing the studio to kiss her cheek. From Lydia, at the Gardner Center. Elise set down her paintbrush and opened the envelope. Inside was a bound proof of a book, Phoenix, Art from the Ashes. The exhibition catalog expanded into a full publication documenting not just the artwork but the extraordinary story behind it. It's beautiful, she said, turning the pages slowly. The photographs captured the exhibition perfectly. Emma's portrait central to the narrative, surrounded by the new works Elise had created, interspersed with Sarah's photographs and artifacts from their intertwined journeys. Lydia says the publisher wants to release it in September, Michael explained. They're already receiving pre-orders from art schools and museums. Elise traced her finger over a photograph of Emma's sketchbook, displayed alongside Sarah's letter. I never imagined any of this when you showed me that photo of the painting in the park. Life has a way of surprising us, Michael said, his arms slipping comfortably around her waist as they looked through the book together. The final pages contained photographs from the exhibition's closing ceremony, a private event where those most closely connected to the story had gathered to mark its conclusion and continuation. Richard was there, standing respectfully beside Elise as they both gazed at Emma's portrait. Marcus Chen and Amara Jones chatted near the triptych. Sarah's mother, Patricia, who had traveled from Maine for the occasion, stood with Michael before the display of her daughter's photographs. "Patricia called yesterday," Michael said. "She's coming back to visit in June." Elise smiled. "I'm glad. She brings so much of Sarah with her stories. I never would have heard otherwise." "She said the same about you and Emma," Michael replied. "How your stories help her understand parts of Sarah she never knew." Their conversation was interrupted by the ringing of Elise's phone. She glanced at the screen. "It's Marcus. I should take this." While Elise spoke with the gallery owner, Michael wandered the studio, studying her works in progress. The largest canvas showed a garden, in early stages, the structure laid out, colors blocked in, details yet to emerge. He recognized it as his own garden, the one Sarah had designed and planted, the one he had maintained in her absence, the one that now flourished under Elise's additional care. When Elise finished her call, her expression was complex excitement, mixed with something like apprehension. "Marcus has a proposal," she said. "The Modern Museum, the one Richard originally wanted. Emma's portrait, for they're planning a major exhibition on art and memory next year. The curator saw our show and wants to include several pieces, including Emma's portrait." "That's extraordinary," Michael said. "How do you feel about it?" Elise moved to the window, looking out at the garden she was painting. "Part of me wants to keep Emma's portrait private, just for us. But another part recognizes that its power extends beyond our personal story." She turned back to him. "The curator wants to meet next week to discuss the concept. Would you come with me?" "Of course," Michael said. "Whatever you decide, I'll support." Elise smiled at his unwavering presence. Marcus mentioned something else. "The museum is interested in Sarah's photographs too, specifically, the ones that were part of our exhibition. They see a dialogue between her work and mine that they want to explore further." Michael was quiet for a moment, absorbing this development. "Sarah would have been amazed," he said finally. "She never exhibited her photographs professionally. She always said they were too personal, too much like diary entries. Yet they speak to universal experiences," Elise observed. "Like all great art, they spent the evening reviewing the book proof, suggesting minor adjustments to Lydia via email." As darkness fell, they moved from the studio to Michael's kitchen, where they prepared dinner together in the comfortable rhythm they had established over months of shared meals. "I've been thinking about Richard's original idea," Elise said as they sat at the kitchen island, plates of pasta between them, "about Emma's portrait being displayed in a museum." Michael kept his tone neutral, knowing this was still a sensitive topic. "I was so opposed to it at first, so protective of her image." Elise twirled pasta around her fork, thoughtful. "But seeing how people responded to her at the Gardner Center, how her portrait became a point of connection for so many who'd experienced similar losses, it changed my perspective." "The exhibition transformed the context," Michael suggested. "It wasn't just Emma on display, but the entire journey of loss and recovery." "Exactly," Elise nodded. "And this new exhibition could extend that journey, create even more connections." They discussed the possibilities long into the evening, how Emma's portrait and Sarah's photographs might continue their work of healing and connection in a larger venue, reaching people who hadn't seen the original exhibition. Later, as they stood together on the back porch, watching stars appear in the spring sky, Elise felt a sense of peace that had once seemed impossible. The portrait that had been lost and found had opened a path not just back to her art, but forward into a life where grief and joy coexisted, where loss and discovery were part of the same continuing story. "Whatever we decide about the museum," she said softly, "Emma and Sarah will be there with us, guiding the choices we make." Michael's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Yes," he agreed. "They always are." The Modern Museum's curator, Dr. Naomi Parker, was younger than Elise had expected, a woman in her early 40s, with a sharp intelligence and genuine passion for her work. They met in the museum's conference room, surrounded by preliminary materials for the art and memory exhibition. "Your story is extraordinary," Dr. Parker said after they had discussed the basic concept. "The journey of Emma's portrait, lost, rescued, recovered, and the connections it created between all of you." She gestured to include Michael, who sat beside Elise. "It embodies everything this exhibition hopes to explore about how art preserves what matters most to us." "We appreciate your interest," Elise replied carefully. "But Emma's portrait is very personal. I need to understand exactly how it would be presented." Dr. Parker nodded. "Of course, the exhibition will feature several memory narratives, artworks with significant personal histories, Each will have its own space, its own story told through the art itself, and supporting materials. She opened a portfolio on the table. This is our preliminary design for your section. The renderings showed a thoughtfully designed space where Emma's portrait would be central but not isolated, accompanied by selected pieces from Elise's exhibition, photographs from Sarah's collection, and interactive elements where visitors could reflect on their own experiences of loss and recovery. We want to honor the full story, Dr. Parker explained. Not just the portrait itself, but what it represents: the power of art to connect people across time and circumstance. As they discussed details of the installation, Elise felt her initial reservations giving way to cautious enthusiasm. The museum's approach was sensitive and thoughtful, focused on creating meaningful engagement rather than spectacle. "There's one more element I'd like to propose," Dr. Parker said as their meeting concluded. "We have a foundation program that supports artists working with themes of healing and transformation. I'd like to establish a grant in Emma and Sarah's names funding for artists who use their work to process grief and create connection." Elise and Michael exchanged glances, surprised by the suggestion. The grant would provide financial support and exhibition opportunities, Dr. Parker continued, a way for their story to continue generating positive impact. "That's a beautiful idea," Elise said, genuinely moved. "Something meaningful could come from all this loss." "I'd like to contribute to the initial funding," Michael added, through Sarah's Photography Foundation. They left the museum with a sense of possibility that extended beyond the exhibition itself. As they walked through the sculpture garden outside, Michael took Elise's hand. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That letting go doesn't have to mean losing," she replied, sharing Emma's portrait, Sarah's photographs. "It feels like the right next step." Michael nodded. "Sarah always said art doesn't fully exist until it's experienced by others." That evening, they sat in Michael's garden, watching fireflies emerge as twilight deepened. The space had flourished under their combined care. Sarah's original design, enhanced by Elise's artist's eye for color and texture. "I've been thinking about the grant program," Elise said, sipping wine as the first stars appeared overhead. "What if we expanded it beyond the museum's initial concept? What do you have in mind?" "A foundation specifically for artists affected by disaster, fire, flood, conflict, people who've lost their work, their studios, their creative communities." Elise set down her glass, warming to the idea. "We could provide emergency grants, replacement supplies, studio space, like a creative first response team," Michael suggested, remembering Sarah's work, preserving the possibility of art when everything else is lost. "Exactly." Elise's voice grew more animated. "The Lazarus Foundation helping artistic voices rise from the ashes. Marcus would want to be involved," Michael said. "And we could partner with disaster relief organizations, insurance companies." They stayed up late into the night, outlining their vision, making lists of potential partners and resources. By morning, the idea had taken solid form, a foundation that would honor both Emma and Sarah by extending the healing they had experienced to others facing similar losses. Over the following weeks, they refined the concept with input from Marcus, Amara, and Lydia. Richard, to Elise's surprise, offered his legal services pro bono to establish the foundation's structure. Sarah's mother contributed Sarah's life insurance policy, which had remained largely untouched in an investment account. "This is exactly what she would have wanted it used for," Patricia said during a video call. "Helping people rebuild their creative lives after disaster." As summer bloomed in Michael's garden, the foundation took shape alongside their plans for the museum exhibition. Elise continued painting, her work evolving to reflect her changing relationship with grief, less raw, more reflective, increasingly focused on transformation and renewal. One particularly warm evening, as they sat on the porch steps watching the sunset, Michael turned to Elise with an expression she had come to recognize: thoughtful consideration preceding something significant. "I've been thinking about the carriage house," he said. "How it's become your space, how right that feels." Elise nodded. The studio had indeed become hers, in ways neither of them had anticipated when he first offered it. Her materials filled the built-in storage, her completed canvases lined the walls. Her presence had thoroughly transformed what had been an empty memorial to Sarah's creativity. "I've been thinking about the main house too," Michael continued. "How it feels when you're here, and how it feels when you're not." Elise felt a flutter of anticipation, recognizing the direction of his thoughts. They had been dividing their time between his house and her apartment for months. the arrangement comfortable but increasingly impractical. The house was too empty after Sarah died, Michael said. I stayed because leaving felt like another loss I couldn't bear. But now, ... He looked around at the garden they had tended together, the home that had gradually filled with evidence of their shared life. Now it feels right again, because of you. Michael, Elise began, but he gently interrupted. I'm not asking you to replace what I lost, he said, his eyes holding hers. I'm asking you to help me continue building something new, something that honors what came before, while creating space for what's possible now. Elise reached for his hand, understanding completely. Their relationship had never been about replacing their losses, but about creating connection from them, a bridge between past and future. Are you asking me to move in? She said with a small smile. I'm asking for more than that, Michael replied. I'm asking you to make this our home, not just mine, to combine our lives fully, not just in the evenings and weekends. Yes, Elise said simply. That feels right to me too. As fireflies began to appear in the garden, they talked about practical details: which of her furniture would come, which rooms might be rearranged, how her apartment might be sublet to a young artist who needed affordable space. Emma's portrait, Elise said suddenly. Where should it go here? Michael considered the question seriously. Wherever feels right to you. It could stay in your apartment if that's better. No, Elise said with certainty. It belongs with us, but not in our bedroom. I think somewhere we see it daily, but where it's part of our home, not defining it. The living room, Michael suggested, where it can be part of our everyday life, but not overshadow it. Elise nodded, appreciating his understanding. And Sarah's photographs, the same, he said, present but not enshrined, part of who we are and how we got here, but not containing us. As night fell fully around them, they continued planning their shared future, a life built not despite their losses, but because of how those losses had shaped them, connected them, opened them to possibilities they might otherwise never have discovered. 1 year later, Elise sat on a bench in the same park where Michael had first approached her with the image of Emma's portrait. On his phone, the autumn air carried the same crispness. Leaves danced across the pathways in similar patterns, but everything else had changed. She watched Michael across the way, talking with a young woman whose studio had been destroyed in a warehouse fire the previous month. He was explaining the Lazarus Foundation's emergency grant program, the resources available to help her rebuild her creative practice. The woman listened intently, hope gradually replacing the despair that had been evident when they first approached. The foundation had grown beyond their initial vision, partnering with insurance companies, disaster relief organizations, and art supply manufacturers to provide comprehensive support to artists affected by catastrophe. In its first year, they had helped 27 creators recover from fires, floods, and storms, providing emergency funds, replacement tools, temporary studio space, and emotional support from others who understood the unique impact of losing one's creative work. Today was their first Art in the Park outreach event. Foundation volunteers spread throughout the city's green spaces, seeking artists who might need their help or who might contribute their talents to the cause. The concept had been Richard's suggestion. Surprisingly enough, his legal expertise had proven invaluable as the foundation took shape. His involvement a healing continuation of the truths they had established around Emma's portrait. Elise opened her sketchbook, a habit she had maintained even as her professional work expanded to larger canvases and more ambitious projects. Her pencil moved across the page, capturing Michael's attentive posture as he listened to the young artist's story. After a year together, she still found new aspects of him to observe, new expressions to capture. Her phone chimed with a text from Lydia. Installation complete. Everything looks perfect. See you both tonight. The Modern Museum's Art and Memory exhibition was opening to the public tomorrow, but tonight was the private reception for contributing artists and their guests. Emma's portrait had been carefully transported 3 days earlier, along with selected pieces from Elise's collection and Sarah's photographs. The installation design they had developed with Dr. Parker created a narrative space where visitors could experience the full story of connection and recovery. Elise felt a familiar flutter of nervousness at the thought of the evening ahead, but it was tempered by confidence that had been absent a year ago. This time, she wasn't exhibiting work that represented her tentative return to art, but pieces created from a place of established strength and purpose. Michael concluded his conversation with the young artist, handing her a foundation card with contact information and next steps. He scanned the park until he spotted Elise, his face warming with recognition and affection as he walked toward her bench. "Another one?" he asked, noticing her open sketchbook. Elise smiled. "I can't help it. You're still my favorite subject." He sat beside her, glancing at the sketch. "Lydia texted you too." "Yes, everything's ready." Elise closed her sketchbook, suddenly thoughtful. "It feels right, having Emma's portrait there. I wasn't sure it would, but it does." "Because of the context," Michael suggested. "It's not displayed as just a beautiful object, but as part of a living story." Elise nodded. "A story that keeps evolving." She gestured toward the young artist Michael had been helping. "Like with her, she create new work because of what happened today." "That's what the foundation is about," Michael agreed. "Not just replacing what was lost, but enabling what comes next." They gathered their outreach materials and walked through the park toward home. Their life together had settled into comfortable rhythms, mornings in their respective creative spaces, evenings shared over meals and conversation, weekends split between foundation work and personal projects. The house that had once felt too empty to Michael and too full of someone else's history too. Elise had transformed into a home that honored the past while embracing the present. Emma's portrait hung in their living room, positioned where natural light illuminated it during the day. It had become part of their daily landscape, still precious, still poignant, but no longer a shrine to grief. Sarah's photographs were displayed throughout the house, integrated with Elise's paintings and objects they had chosen together, creating a visual conversation between the woman Michael had loved and the woman he loved now. "We should invite Marcus and Amara for dinner next week," Elise said as they walked, "to thank them for all their help with the foundation's first year." "Good idea," Michael agreed. "Patricia too, if she's still in town after the opening." Sarah's mother had become a frequent visitor, finding comfort in her connection to the foundation that carried her daughter's spirit. Her relationship with Elise had evolved from tentative to deeply affectionate, bonded by their shared understanding of how love persists beyond loss. At home, they prepared for the evening ahead. Elise, in a deep green dress that complemented the dominant color in her newest paintings, Michael in a suit tailored for the exhibition opening. As she fastened a necklace Patricia had given her, a delicate silver pendant that had been Sarah caught Michael watching her in the mirror. "What?" she asked, smiling at his reflection. "Just thinking about how far we've come since that day in the park," he replied. "How unlikely it all was. Or how inevitable," Elise suggested, "depending on how you look at it." At the museum, they were greeted by Dr. Parker and guided through the exhibition before other guests arrived. The art and memory installation was powerful, diverse stories told through paintings, sculptures, photographs, and interactive elements, each exploring how creativity preserves what matters most across time and circumstance. Their section occupied a thoughtfully designed space near the center of the exhibition. Emma's portrait was positioned as the heart of the narrative, surrounded by Elise's paintings, Sarah's photographs, and artifacts of their intertwined journey. The fire report, Sarah's letter, the sketch of Emma's hands, a digital display, invited visitors to contribute their own stories of art that had helped them through loss. "It's beautiful," Elise said, taking in the completed installation. "It honors them both perfectly." As guests began to arrive for the reception, Elise and Michael stood together before Emma's portrait. The amber eyes that had once been solely a source of pain for Elise now represented something more complex, grief transformed but not diminished. Love continued rather than concluded. Richard arrived with his new wife, a warm-hearted therapist who had helped smooth the rough edges of his personality. He approached Elise and Michael with genuine appreciation for the exhibition space. "You've done Emma proud," he said simply. "Thank you for allowing me to be part of it." Marcus and Amara came next, followed by Lydia and May from the Gardner Center. Patricia arrived with several of Sarah's former colleagues from the fire department. The group that gathered around Emma's portrait represented the expanding circles of connection that had grown from what once seemed like irredeemable loss. Later, as they moved through the exhibition speaking with other artists and guests, Elise found herself before a piece she hadn't seen during their initial tour, a small painting added to their section, positioned where it created dialogue with both Emma's portrait and Sarah's photographs. It was Michael's work, a watercolor of his garden, as seen from the Carriage House studio, painted with an architect's precision and an artist's heart. The piece captured a moment of transition, light breaking across flowers that Sarah had planted and Elise had tended, New growth emerging alongside established beauty. When did you... Elise began when Michael joined her before the painting. I've been practicing in secret, he admitted. It's not as accomplished as your work or Sarah's, but it felt important to add my voice to the conversation. Elise studied the painting with growing appreciation for its quiet honesty. It's perfect, she said. It completes the circle. As the evening progressed, they watched visitors engage with their installation, reading the narrative text, studying Emma's portrait, absorbing the story of loss and connection. Some wiped away tears, others spoke in hushed tones about their own experiences of grief and recovery. A few approached Elise to share how her journey had given them hope for their own. Near the end of the reception, Dr. Parker gathered everyone for a brief announcement about the Lazarus Foundation's work and the new grant program established in Emma and Sarah's names. As applause filled the gallery, Elise felt Michael's hand find hers, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. Full circle, he whispered, echoing her earlier observation, but not ended. No, Elise agreed, looking around at the expanded family they had created from the fragments of their broken pasts. Not ended at all. Just continuing in ways we couldn't have imagined. Later that night, they walked through the quiet garden behind their home, the path illuminated by small solar lights. Above them, stars punctuated the darkness, distant points of brightness in the vast unknown. I've been thinking about time, Elise said as they paused beneath the old oak tree, how certain moments change everything that follows. If Sarah hadn't heard my phone ringing that night, if you hadn't gone to the Lazarus Gallery that day, if you hadn't been sketching in the park when I finally found you, Michael added. All these unlikely connections, Elise continued. Too many to be coincidence, too specific to be fate. Sarah would say it's the universe finding balance, Michael suggested, creating new connections to replace what was lost. Elise considered this, her artist's mind visualizing invisible threads weaving through time and circumstance, connecting Sarah's courage to Emma's portrait, to their present moment beneath the stars. Whatever brought us here, she said finally, I'm grateful for it. For the painting that survived, for the search that led you to find me, for everything that followed. Michael drew her closer, his arm around her shoulders as they gazed up at the night sky. Emma and Sarah, he said softly. Always part of our story. Always, Elise agreed. Not just in memory, but in how we live now, in what we create together. Above them, a shooting star traced a brilliant path across the darkness, a moment of beauty, as fleeting and eternal as all that had brought them to this place. This time, this continuing story of loss transformed by love.